Chapter 477. Xianling's strategy to eliminate demons. 3 days later, Lu Changsu led 8,000 demon soldiers and arrived at Clear Feather Sect's mountain gate. However, he did not get too close. He only sent a letter to Clear Feather Sect and did not make any further movements. He only suppressed the army formation and wandered far away from the formation. A few more days passed. Lu Changsu was having a banquet in the cabin when he suddenly heard a loud sound from the sky. He hurriedly threw away the wine cup in his hand and ran out to look at the horizon. He saw layers of thick clouds appearing on the surface of the sea, as if they were covered with snow and frost, at the same level as the sky and sea. They were like a line of white jade, extending to the north and south, gradually disappearing into the distant sky. He was immediately excited and said, "It's the prefecture master." Steward Yao saw this and could not help but gasp. He said in shock, "Prefecture master, aren't you going to summon all the people in the sect?" At this moment, there was a huge ship floating above the clouds. It was 2,000 feet long from the beginning to the end. It had a dragon's head and a phoenix's tail, and it had 8 floors. There were 108 sea pythons guarding the ship. They were all winged, golden-eyed, silver-scaled mutants. In front of them, there was a row of stairs that were 100 zhang wide hanging down, falling straight into the mist and water smoke. On the 2 sides, there were 20 horizontal rods, each controlled by a whale guard that was 30 zhang tall. Their shouts shook the heavens and the earth. Every time they shook, the sea of clouds would tremble, like a mountain moving forward slowly. Prefecture Master Lu Yuanxing was sitting in the main hall of the ship, looking at mysterious Spirit Island that was hidden by the mountain mist. He looked to be in his 60s, his temples were white, and he wore a crown with golden wings and pearls on his head. He wore a double sun-bright robe, a silver python purple belt around his waist, and a sleeveless cloak covering his body. On top of his head, there were 3 strong clouds that surged in the sky. This time he came to Clear Feather Sect. 47 islands under the sect responded, and there were a total of 350,000 demon soldiers. It could be said that he had taken out all the resources he had. If not for those powerful cultivators, such a force was enough to dominate Eastern Sea. However, Li Wenxing was still not satisfied. One had to know that the Reef Mansion could originally mobilize more than 500,000 demon soldiers at will, and could even fight against any one of the 8 demon tribes of the northern nether continent. However, after the death of the ancestor immortal of the heavenly abode, the momentum was not as good as before. The establishment of the Clear Feather Sect in the distant sea made matters worse. In just a few decades, their faction shrank by more than 30%. Such a situation. If he didn't try to reveal his edge, then it probably wouldn't be long before Reef Manor would have no choice but to attach itself to Clear Feather's sect, and this forced him to have no choice but to seize this opportunity and make a risky move. Just as he was deep in thought with his eyes closed, a servant in front of him reported, "Manor Head, General Lu Changsu requests an audience." Lu Yuanxing immediately cast aside his thoughts. He sat up straight and said in a deep voice, "Call him up." Not long after, Lu Changsu arrived at the bottom of the stairs and prostrated herself on the ground. He loudly said, "This general greets the manor head." Lu Yuanxing said, "Changsu, have you delivered the letter I asked you to deliver?" Lu Changsu cupped his fists and replied respectfully, "A few days ago, I sent a letter to Tao Zhenren to hand over the disciple who killed the 18th prince. However, the Clear Feather Sect ignored it." Lu Xingyuan nodded and said, "This matter is within my expectations. You've worked hard these few days." He stretched out his hand and picked up a bucket of jade beads from the big vat beside him. "I'll give you a pot of essence pearl. Take it and cultivate well." Lu Changsu was overjoyed. "Thank you, Manor Lord. Such a good thing." This was not something that could be easily obtained. He looked at the pearl that was filled to the brim with covetous eyes, walked forward in large strides, and respectfully received the cup. At this moment, a streak of smoke suddenly appeared in the sky and headed towards mysterious Spirit Island. Everyone on the boat noticed it, but no one made a move. Lu Changsu also stared at it for a while. He suddenly shouted, "That's Wang Yingfang." He turned his head and said excitedly to Lu Yuanxing, "Manor Head, "Do you want this general to capture her?" Wang Yingfang was one of the 4 great disciples of Tao Xinren. If she was captured or killed, it would be cutting off a section of clear feather sect's wings. Lu Yuanxing stared closely at Wang Yingfang's figure but still did not give the order. Seeing the streak of light get closer to the mysterious spirit array, Lu Changsu immediately panicked. Disregarding seniority, he came up and grabbed Lu Yuanxing's sleeve, calling out, "Manner head." Lu Yuanxing calmly thought about it. He had come in such a fierce manner this time, looking fierce and imposing, but in reality he was walking on the edge of a cliff. If he was the slightest bit careless, he would die a horrible death. Moreover, he was only here to suppress Clear Feather Sect's reputation, not to take revenge for his son. Thus, he said, "A disciple of Clear Feather Sect killed my beloved son, so I came to seek justice. That is the right thing to do. Wang Yingfang is Tao Doran's direct disciple. If we make a move, there will be no way out. Let her go." Lu Changsu could not help but be disappointed, but there was nothing he could do. He could only retreat resentfully. Lu Yuanxing glanced at him and gently comforted him. "Changsu, there is no need to be impatient. Tao Daoren does not have any Yuanying disciples. Unless he personally makes a move, we will definitely win. Why take the risk?" Lu Changsu agreed in a low voice, but in his heart he did not agree and cursed. Reef Manor had made such a big move, how could Tao Zhenhong be kind in the future? Since he had already offended him, he might as well offend him thoroughly. Anyway, with Chu Zhenren watching from the side, there was no need to be afraid of Tao Zhenhong. Why should he be so timid? On the other side, Wang Yingfang had already rushed back to Mysterious Spirit Island. Among the 4 disciples of Clear Feather Sect, 3 of them were cultivating in seclusion on the island, hoping to enter the Yuanying state. Now, she was the only one managing the daily affairs. She was originally fighting with a scattered sect on Clear Wave Island tens of thousands of miles away. Just as she was about to succeed, she received a talisman and learned that something had happened in the sect, so she hurried back. She flew along the mountain path and arrived in front of the Patriarch Hall. She said, "Disciple Wang Yingfang wishes to see the Patriarch." The Taoist boy in front of the door did not move. He only said, "The Patriarch has decreed that Uncle Master will go and restrain the disciples. They are not to go out without orders. There will be people to deal with the demons outside the door later." Wang Yingfang was startled and thought to herself, "That old demon Lu is a Yuanying Zhenren. He is very difficult to deal with. Does Master mean that one of the disciples has broken through to the Yuanying state?" Then she shook her head. How could it be that it was so easy to reach the Yuanying state? Could it be one of the demon kings in the sect? However, even though the Reef Prefecture had declined, its foundation was still there. Not to mention that Lu Yuanxing was a second-stage nascent soul realm cultivator, there were already 7 disciples who had reached the core transformation realm and 2 nascent soul realm elders. Such a force was not something that the Clear Feather Sect could compare to for the time being. Although Reef Prefecture did not attack the island because of Tao Zhenren, this kind of behavior would definitely cause Clear Feather Sect's prestige to fall to the ground if they did not respond to it. She sighed to herself. Unfortunately, Clear Feather Sect had not been established for a long time and did not have a killing true weapon. Otherwise, if she used it, who would dare to bully them? As she thought about it, she walked down the mountain. At this moment, she saw a group of more than 10 disciples walking out of the island. The disciple at the front was wearing a black Taoist robe. He held a magic sword and stood on a heavenly crane. Wang Yingfang recognized that this was the disciple of her junior brother Yang Lin. Her eyes narrowed and she scolded, "Ling Tianxing, what are you doing?" The disciple called Ling Tianxing turned around. When he saw Wang Yingfang, he hesitated for a moment and stepped forward. He gritted his teeth and said, "Third martial ant, I want to go out and kill this group of demons." Nonsense. Wang Yingfang looked at him with a straight face. She did not reprimand him but said in a deep voice, "Listen carefully. From now on, all disciples are to guard the sect. Do your homework in the morning and evening. You are not allowed to go out. Quickly disperse." Ling Tianxing's face instantly turned red. His mouth moved a few times, but in the end he did not dare to disobey. He bowed, turned around and left. When the senior and junior brothers behind him saw this scene, they could only sigh at each other and dejectedly disperse. Wang Yingfang looked at the back of the group. She scoffed and said, "Shui Xiaoying, stay. I have something to ask you." Shui Xiaoying was originally hiding behind the people and wanted to leave. When she heard Wang Yingfang calling her, her body trembled. She lowered her head and walked forward, saying, "Master." Wang Yingfang did not reprimand her and simply replied, "Your master has just received a letter to return to the mountain gate." However, the contents of the letter were vague. "Your master wants to ask you, what is the matter that has caused the Reef residents to make such a big fuss?" Though she knew that Reef Manor wanted to make a move, she had been trying her best to avoid it. This time, she did not know what excuse they had. Shui Xingying answered honestly, "Disciple heard that it was a disciple of my sect who killed old demon Lu's son." Wang Yingfang frowned, "A disciple from my sect?" Shui Xiaoying shook her head, indicating that she did not know. Wang Yingfang lowered her head and pondered. After a while, she suddenly looked up and said, "Recently, has there been anyone from the sea coming to clear Feather sect?" Shui Xiaoying nodded and said, Yes. A few days ago, a Taoist Zhang from Donghua continent came to the island to pay his respects to the patriarch. Master does not know that this Taoist is quite capable. He did not have any talismans with him, but the two white apes in front of the patriarch's hall did not stop him. Zhang? From Donghua continent? Wang Yingfang's thoughts turned and she thought, could it be Taoist Zhang? Yes, it must be him. Only he could meet my master so easily. That Lu Yuanqing's son was most likely killed by Taoist Zhang. Although his cultivation is extraordinary and his flying sword technique is brilliant, the Reef Manor is too powerful. I think he could only come to Clear Feather sect to avoid trouble. When she first met Zhang Yan, he was only at the Mystic Light realm. Now that she had not seen him for decades, she thought that even if he was a disciple of a large Qinsong sect, he would at most be at the third level of the core transformation realm. On the other hand, the Reef Manor Master was a second-level Yuanyin cultivator. The two of them could not be compared. Thinking about this, she could not help but complain about Zhang Yan, but at the same time, she sighed. My sect owes Taoist Zhang a great favor. No matter what, I can only think of a way to protect him. At this moment, in the Patriarch's hall, Tao Zhenren, who was meditating with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and said, Tong, go and invite Taoist Zhang here. Not long after, Zhang Yan came to the main hall and bowed. Greetings, spiritual master. Tao Zhenren said, Taoist Zhang, come and take a look. He waved his hand and a water mirror appeared in front of him. It reflected everything that was happening outside of Xianling Island. Zhang Yan focused his attention and saw demonic clouds billowing above the sea. Banners fluttered in the wind and countless demonic soldiers stood in formation with weapons in their hands. He smiled and said, the demonic army has arrived. We can kill the demons once and for all and restore peace to Xianling Island. Chapter 214 Struggle for the Great Tao Full text free reading Chapter 214 Mysterious Spirit Strategy to Kill Demons has been updated. Chapter 478 Struggle for the Great Tao 215 Struggle for the Great Tao free reading Chapter 215 The 9 phases Swallowing Star came from the Clear Feather sect's disciples were enraged by the Reef Manor's demon soldiers. They wished they could go out and fight. However, due to their master's order, they had to stay in the sect. Many of them felt depressed. Ling Tianxing came to Wang Yingfang several times to ask for permission to go out and fight the demon soldiers. In the end, Wang Yingfang became impatient. Her face darkened and she said coldly, Who dares to disobey the patriarch's order? Leave now. If you say another word, you will be punished according to the sect rules. Ling Tianxing had no choice but to give up on the idea. However, he could not help but feel indignant. After walking far away, he suddenly turned around and said loudly, Uncle Master, if Master Yang was here, he would not allow these demons to run wild in front of our sect. Wang Yingfang shook her head and did not want to argue with him. Her junior brother Yang Lin had many disciples, but they were all good and bad. While Ling Tianxing's talent was not bad, He was too stubborn and only knew how to show off. If it was not for her junior brother Yang Lin's face, she would have chased Ling Tianxing out of the sect for what he said just now. Ling Tianxing left Wang Yingfang and flew back to his cave residence. Halfway there, he suddenly thought of someone and said, "Since we can't get through Uncle Master Wang, why don't we ask senior brother Fu Yuqing to help us?" The more he thought about it, the more he felt this idea was feasible. Fu Yuqing was different from them. While he was a Clear Feather sect's third-generation disciple in name, due to his high talent, he was personally taught Xian techniques by Tao Jinren and had reached the core formation level. If this person took the lead, Wang Yingfang might not be able to stop him. After he had this idea, he turned around and headed east. In a flash, he arrived at Fu Yuqing's cave residence. He shouted at the door and a Taoist child came out to welcome him. When he reached the room and saw Fu Yuqing, he could not wait to tell him the purpose of his visit. Then, he showed a hopeful expression. Fu Yuqing shook his head. He said seriously, "Junior brother, since the patriarch has given the order, how can we disobey it?" Ling Tianxing saw that Fu Yuqing said the same. He couldn't help but be disappointed. When Fu Yuqing saw his dejected expression, he smiled and said, "Junior martial brother Ling, why are you so dejected? Patriarch only ordered our disciples not to go out without orders, but he didn't say that we can't fight." Ling Tianxing was confused. "Senior apprentice brother, what do you mean?" Fu Yuqing smiled and said, "Junior apprentice brother, have you forgotten that our Clear Feather sect has spiritual birds that we can tame aside from our martial arts?" Ling Tianxing was startled for a moment before he realized, yes. Senior martial brother is right. Fu Yuqing looked outside and took out a talisman. He said, "These are the 30,000 bird soldiers that Patriarch entrusted to me to rear. I can use them to kill those demons." He raised his hand and waved the talisman. He made another hand sign and said, "Release." The talisman turned into a ray of green light and flew away. At this moment, Lu Changsu and Cui Mulong were drinking on the surface of the sea. Suddenly, they heard a strange sound coming from Mysterious Spirit Island. They couldn't help but look over in surprise. Spiritual birds flew up from the island one after another, forming a black mass. The sound was actually the sound of their wings flapping. There were so many of them that they could cover the sky. Every single one of them was extraordinary, as if they had been nurtured by a secret technique. The 3 heavenly cranes at the front were extraordinary. When they flew to the top of the clouds, they turned their bodies and turned into human forms. They were all wearing golden crowns and white robes. They were beautiful and graceful. Lu Yuanxing sat on the ocean boat and saw the situation clearly. He noticed that the 3 sky cranes also had core formation cultivation and couldn't help but be surprised. So old Tao still had this kind of power hidden in the dark. He thought. He could tell just by looking at these spirit birds. Mysterious Spirit Island's resources were much deeper than he had imagined. If 1 or 2 of their disciples reached nascent soul, they would definitely surpass the Reef Manor. When he thought about this, he was secretly glad. Fortunately, he had forced his way here today. If he waited until old Taoist Tao's wings were fully grown, he would have no other choice but to submit to him. But now, as long as Tao Jinren didn't show up, he had nothing to fear. He looked around and said, "Who wants to come up and fight?" A tall and sturdy elder in a golden robe stood up and said loudly, "These heavenly cranes have cultivated for many years. I'm afraid it will be difficult for the younger generation to deal with them. Also, it won't be a good scene if they fight. Let me take care of them." Lu Yuanxing nodded. "With third uncle here, it will be a piece of cake." "Thank you." The elder in a golden robe cupped his hands at Lu Yuanxing and walked to the front of the big ship. He shook his shoulder and a cloud flew up above his head. He smiled disdainfully at the flock of birds that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. He clasped his hands behind his back and shouted. Suddenly, his belly bulged and he opened his mouth. Suddenly, a vortex appeared in his mouth. A vortex visible to the naked eye appeared out of thin air, stirring up a huge amount of seawater. The elder in a golden robe raised his head again and the vortex went up to the sky. A black wind rose from the sea like a tornado and went straight up to the sky. The flock of spiritual birds just now was flying over. When they saw the sudden change, they knew something was wrong. But before they could turn around, they felt a huge force hit them. They felt dizzy and their bodies started to spin uncontrollably, falling down along the funnel-shaped black wind. Even the 3 sky cranes at the front were unable to resist at all. Before they could even struggle, they fell to the ground. The golden-robed old man pursed his lips again and sucked with all his might. The black wind whistled down and slowly converged into his mouth, not letting a single strand of it go. When all the wind and smoke were collected, the 30,000 spirit birds also disappeared at the same time. He patted his belly in satisfaction and returned to Lu Yuanxing. He cupped his hands and said, "Manor head, I didn't fail you." Lu Yuanxing smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work, third uncle." The elder in a golden robe laughed and waved his hand as if he had done something unimportant and went back to his seat. On the other side, Shui Xingying saw the 30,000 spiritual birds being swallowed by this person and her face paled. She took a few steps closer to Wang Yingfang and said in fear, "Master, what Taoist technique is this? Why is it so powerful?" Wang Yingfang's face was a little ugly and she said in a low voice, "This technique is called 9 phases swallowing stars. It is the direct divine art of the Lu clan. It is said that when cultivated to the extreme, even the stars and moon in the sky can be swallowed. This technique is not something we can block." Although she had heard of this divine art long ago, it was her first time seeing it. She sighed in her heart, "The Yuanying cultivators are really not something we core formation cultivators can block. No matter how many of them go, it will only make that person swallow a few more mouthfuls." Just as she was pondering, she suddenly saw a golden ray shooting down from the peak of Xianling Island. It was like a meteor that flew across the sky. When the light reached the surface of the sea, it suddenly exploded. Stars scattered everywhere. In the dazzling golden light, a young Taoist with an extraordinary appearance slowly walked out. He stood in front of the 300,000 demon soldiers alone. Wang Yingfang's spirit was lifted. She heard Tao Zhenren say that someone would come out to deal with the demons, and she thought it must be this person. She quickly looked up, and when she saw the appearance of the Taoist, she was stunned and cried out involuntarily, "Fellow Taoist Zhang?" She was expecting Tao Zhenren to invite a powerful cultivator, but when she saw that it was Zhang Yan, she was a little disappointed. In her opinion, Zhang Yan did have an extremely brilliant killing technique with the flying sword and could come and go as he pleased. However, it was far from enough to solve the current predicament. Zhang Yan bowed to the big boat and said loudly, "I Qinsong Zhang Yan, invite Manor Master Lu to come out for a chat." Lu Changsu was originally leaning against the chair, and she said in surprise, "Oh, there's still someone from the Pure Feather sect who's willing to come out? He's quite courageous. Could it be that the third elder didn't scare him off just now?" He then frowned and muttered to himself, "Zhang Yan? Why do I feel like I've heard this name before?" When Cui Mulong heard Zhang Yan introducing himself, his expression suddenly froze. He looked at him carefully and his expression changed a few times. He threw the wine cup away and quietly leaped into the air. A light smoke floated toward the west and he left without saying goodbye. At this moment, a few demon generals saw the golden-robed old man's display of power and were itching to give it a try. When they saw Zhang Yan coming over alone, it seemed like they could take advantage of him. They exchanged glances and waved their hands. More than 100 demon soldiers rushed out and surrounded him. Zhang Yan smiled. He did not move, but a clear mist rose from the top of his head and rushed to the blue sky in the blink of an eye. A strong cloud appeared, and the cloud became bigger and bigger. In the end, it became 600 feet in size and hung high in the sky. In an instant, it stirred up the wind and clouds. The demon generals and demon soldiers only felt their breathing become sluggish as a strong force pressed down on their bodies. Before they could cry out in pain, they were swept away by the strong wind and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Lu Changsu did not pay much attention to it at first. He looked like he was watching a good show, but when he saw the situation, he suddenly jumped up and knocked over the table. He was shocked and said, "Spiritual Master Yuanying?" Lu Yuanxing's expression was solemn. He did not think that the Clear Feathers sect would actually invite a Yuanying cultivator, which messed up his plan. But that was not all. If it was a normal Yuanying cultivator, he did not need to worry too much. However, the other party was a disciple of the Qinsong school. This was very troublesome. He could not help but look at the two Yuanying elders who shook their heads at him. He pondered for a moment and stood up from his seat. He laughed and said loudly, "I am Lu Yunxing. What business do you have with me?" Zhang Yan looked over and smiled. He said, "I have come to settle a karma with Manor Head." Lu Yuanxing chuckled and waved his hand. "I do not know you. What karma is there to talk about?" Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and made a loud noise. He shouted, "Otherwise, Manor Head Lu's son died because of I. Manor Head Lu, didn't you come here today for this matter? How can you say that there is no karma?" Lu Yuanxing heard this and his eyes suddenly focused on Zhang Yan's face. Chapter 479. Fukuan Ocean Force Formation. When Lu Yuanxing heard that Zhang Yan was the enemy who killed his son, he was filled with murderous intent. He wanted nothing more than to tear Zhang Yan into 1,000 pieces to avenge himself. However, when a thought flashed through his mind, he forcefully held it in. Today, he had come to pressure Clear Feather Sect. If he placed the blame on Zhang Yan, wouldn't he be acting without justification? Thus, he had to insist that it was Clear Feather Sect who killed his beloved son. He could not admit that it was Zhang Yan's doing. When Zhang Yan saw him like this, he could guess some of Lu Yuanxing's intentions. He smiled and said, "Manor Head Lu, I have a good relationship with Clear Feather Sect's fellow Taoists, and I once owed Tao Zhenren a favor. Today, Reef Manor has come to Clear Feather Sect's gate. Although Tao Zhenren will not hold it against you, I cannot stand by and watch. Manor Head, please leave now. Otherwise, I will have my own methods to deal with you." When he said this, the expressions of the demon generals changed. They were instantly enraged. The 300,000 demon soldiers also started to make a ruckus. The golden-robed elder who stood below the stairs snorted. He took a few steps forward and came before Lu Yuanxing. He said in a low voice, "Manor Head, there's no need to say anything more to him. At this point, how can we give in? If word gets out that even a disciple of Qinsong school dares to act so impudently in front of Reef Manor, how can we still have the face to stand on the Eastern Sea?" Lu Yuanxing saw the situation and knew that there was no way to be friendly. He thought to himself, "Since you insist on coming forward, I will fulfill your wish. No matter how powerful Qinsong school is, I don't believe that they can come to the Eastern Sea. Today, I will take care of you first. Later, I will seek trouble with Tao Daoren." He immediately nodded and said, "Then I will have to trouble third uncle to take action. Teach this junior a lesson." The golden-robed old man responded and turned around. He puffed out his chest and coldly snorted, "Junior, don't talk big. Wait until I take you in, then I'll call the elders of your sect to come and get you." As soon as his voice fell, with one hand pressing on his stomach, he was about to use the 9 phases star-swallowing divine art. Just now on Mysterious Spirit Island, Zhang Yan had already seen the power of this mystic art. How could he let him use it so easily? He immediately shouted and the stellar sword pellet flew out from his brow. He charged over. The golden-robed old man was just about to open his mouth when he saw a flash of brilliance in midair. A sword light had already attacked him. He was instantly shocked. He didn't have time to circulate his cultivation method. He waved his sleeve and sprinkled out a 7-colored mist. In the blink of an eye, it spread out more than 100 feet in front of the flying sword. At the same time, he took out a shining copper hoop from his bosom and tossed it into the air in an attempt to protect himself. Who knew that this item would appear just now? Zhang Yan laughed. He reached out and pointed. A clear light flew over and fixed the treasure in midair. The golden-robed old man's expression changed and he conjured a spell. However, although the copper hoop struggled, it couldn't break free. At this moment, the sword light turned. It tore open the 7-colored mist and flew over once more. Seeing how sharp the sword orb was, the golden-robed old man's heart trembled. Heh! A wave of water rose from the top of his head, and a nascent soul that was about 10 feet tall leaped out. As soon as the clear mist dispersed, A protective light shone around its body. The stellar sword pellet slashed upwards. At first, it was smooth, but the deeper it went, the more difficult it became. It was like moving through mud, and it wasn't easy. Zhang Yan knew that it was hard to break and didn't persist. He waved his sleeves and the heaven and earth leaf jumped out. It spun and flew, wanting to trap the old man in and teach him a lesson. The golden-robed old man looked carefully and his expression changed slightly. He seemed to see that this item was strange. He was never willing to block this kind of treasure of unknown origin. Thus, he didn't stand still. He conjured a spell and used an escape technique to retreat. The heaven and earth leaf had the ability to move through space. Seeing him retreat, the leaf shone with an auspicious light. With a clear cry, it moved above his head and a golden light fell down. The golden-robed old man cursed in his heart. He didn't have much time to think. He raised his hand and shot out a red light which collided with the heaven and earth leaf. The two items collided and there was a sudden clap of thunder. The red light shattered into thousands of specks of light and scattered. The heaven and earth leaf was also hit to the side and didn't cover him. However, after shooting out the red light, the golden-robed old man showed a pained expression as if the red light was very precious. Lu Yuanxing, who was watching from the side, saw the golden-robed old man being suppressed. He frowned and said, "Third uncle even used the spirit dispersal sand. This Zhang Yan isn't easy to deal with." He pondered for a moment, then turned his head and whispered to an old man with a hawk nose and deep eyes, "Seventh uncle, since we've already made our move, there's no need to talk about the rules. Just pay attention, and if there's an opportunity, just attack." This old man was another elder of the Reef Manor. He looked at the two people in the field and nodded silently. On the battlefield, Zhang Yan once again sent out the world leaf. This time, the golden-robed old man was already prepared, so he wasn't in a hurry to make his move. He hovered the treasure above his head, and just as the golden light was about to scatter, he let out a cold laugh and suddenly transformed into a silver rainbow. When the golden light descended, it pounced on empty air. Zhang Yan couldn't help but nod. The magic treasures in the hands of cultivators had their own strengths and weaknesses. The heaven and earth leaf was originally a defensive item, but it was a level lower when used to attack. The golden-robed old man was able to see its weakness in an instant. It was very impressive. This Eastern Sea cultivator, whether it was cultivation or eyesight, couldn't be compared to the cultivators of the Central Pillar State. However, just now he had already probed the old man's strength. At this time, he already had a plan in mind. He smiled and controlled the flying sword to slash above his head. Seeing the flying sword coming again, the golden-robed old man was furious. Since the start of the battle, he had been looking for an opportunity to use the 9 symbols divine art. However, Zhang Yan's attacks were like a tide and didn't give him a chance to attack. He had been suppressing his anger and couldn't vent it. At this time, seeing the sword ball coming again, he was confident that he could block it. Therefore, he didn't dodge and only paid attention to the heaven and earth leaf. His mind sank and he was about to use his Dao technique. Seeing him like this, Zhang Yan sneered. He shook his sleeve and took out the 5 spirits white carp shuttle. Once this treasure appeared, it instantly lit up with spiritual light. Like a fish hunting for food, it suddenly rushed out and crossed a distance of several dozen feet in the blink of an eye. It collided with the protective treasure light of the golden-robed old man. The golden-robed old man was mustering his mana to resist the sword ball while paying attention to the heaven and earth leaf that was swimming in the air. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan still had a treasure and was caught off guard. With a loud sound, the protective treasure light was actually broken. The star's sword ball was no longer restrained and fell like a flash of light. He endured the fishy taste that surged up his throat and desperately moved his body to the side. However, whether it was because of his good luck or some other reason, he cried out in pain. Unexpectedly, only one of his arms was cut off and he didn't lose his life. Seeing this, the eagle-nosed elder who was watching the battle from the side couldn't bear it anymore. He hurriedly flew into the battlefield and wanted to help. Zhang Yan glanced at him and laughed loudly. "Come at me." He raised his hand and pointed. He actually turned the spearhead. The heaven and earth leaf, the five spirits' white carp shuttle, and the star's sword ball all flew towards this person. At the same time, he pointed with his hand. With a crack, a purple thunderbolt struck towards him. The eagle-nosed elder turned pale with fright. He had rushed over, but it was already too late to take out his treasure now. He hurriedly took out his yuaning. Just as the protective treasure light lit up, his body shook. Purple light flashed before his eyes and he only heard the sound of thunder. He felt a tightness in his chest and his whole body was in unbearable pain. He knew that he was already heavily injured. However, he didn't lose his mind. With a loud shout, he decisively scattered the cloud above him and turned it into a ball of treasure light to protect his body. This was the accumulation of his hundreds of years of cultivation. It actually blocked both the five spirits' white carp shuttle and the star's sword ball. However, even though he avoided death on the spot, he couldn't avoid the heaven and earth leaf no matter what. A golden light fell from above and enveloped him in the blink of an eye. Lu Yuanxing originally wanted to help, but the change in the situation exceeded his expectations. He couldn't help but hesitate. When he really made his move, it was already a step too late. A strong thunderbolt struck out and struck the golden light. Other than rippling layers of golden light, it couldn't break through. Zhang Yan snorted coldly. With a wave of his sleeve, he took a step forward and entered the golden light. Seeing this scene, his expression couldn't help but turn ugly. At this moment, the golden-robed elder came over while clutching his wound. He was lucky to escape with his life, but he was still in a state of shock. He said weakly, "Mannerhead, this person is difficult to fight. Quickly use the formation to deal with him." However, Lu Yuanxing was a little hesitant, as if he was worried about something. The golden-robed elder said anxiously, "Mannerhead, since this person is familiar with Tao Jinren, I'm afraid he might have some other tricks up his sleeves. If we don't use the formation now, it will be too late." Lu Yuanxing's expression turned solemn. He nodded his head forcefully and turned around. He shouted, "Activate the formation." The few demon generals beside the ocean ship received the order and immediately swung the golden spears in their hands. The big flags behind them waved, and a drum sounded. 1,000 flags rose up like a forest, and a beam of spiritual light pierced into the clouds. The sea waves rolled furiously, and more than 300,000 demon soldiers shouted in unison. Their voices were earth-shattering, and it traveled 100 miles. Endless black smoke surged up from the sea, and waves of cries could be heard. One could faintly see flood dragons that were hundreds of feet long swimming in the sea. This formation was called the Crouching Kuan Sea Force Formation, and there was a true treasure in it. When the Reef Manor was built on the sea, there were only 10,000 troops, and it was this formation that allowed them to run amok in the East Sea. Now, although there was no Taoist Dong Tian presiding over it, they could still manage to use it. Zhang Yan had only entered the heaven and earth leaf for a few breaths, and he had already killed the heavily injured eagle-eyed elder. When he came out, the scene in front of him had changed greatly, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He looked around, but he could only see the scenery within 100 feet, and with just a glance, he knew that a formation was being formed. At this moment, a drum sounded in the formation, and suddenly, several dragon-shaped golden chains flew out, interlocking with each other, and went to grab him. With a thought, the star's sword pellet flew over, and with just a turn in the air, it broke all of them into two. However, the golden chains seemed to be endless. Along with the continuous beating of the drums in the formation, thousands of chains appeared in no time. Looking around, the sky was filled with golden chains, as if a net had been weaved into the sky. Zhang Yan shouted, and a giant hand that could support the sky gushed out from the top, and with a slap, it scattered the hundreds of golden chains. At this moment, Lu Yuanxing's voice came from the formation. "Zhang Yan, no matter how capable you are only one person. My 300,000 troops have formed a formation here, and you killed the elders of my manor. Today, you won't be able to leave." Chapter 216 _ Struggle for the Great Tao Free Reading _ Chapter 216 The Crouching Kuan Sea Force Formation was completed. Chapter 480 As Lu Yuanxing's voice faded away, the golden chains disappeared as well. After a moment of silence, the drumbeats became more rapid. White qi and golden lights rushed around in the black fog. After a while, there was a whistling sound. The seawater suddenly parted, and spiritual energy rushed out like pillars. After flying out from more than 1,000 pillars, they converged in the middle and converged to form a white flood dragon that was 300 meters long. Its fierce eyes stared fiercely, and it tore open its huge mouth and lowered its head to swallow. Zhang Yan's fingers formed a seal, and as soon as he thought about it, the stars seemed to sense his mind, and suddenly transformed into sword qi, wrapping around his body. In a flash, he was already hundreds of feet away, the sea behind him surging to the sky. The white flood dragon's attack missed, but it only turned its head, its 4 claws scratching the waves, and with a twist of its body, it was actually following Zhang Yan was about to turn around to deal with it when he felt a gust of wind coming from behind. Chapter 217 translated by Hypersheep 325 edited by Mike. Ear-breaking formation hastily dodged to the side. Amidst the splashing waves, another white Jiao dragon flew past him. This one was even thicker than the one just now. The Jiao dragon's head was already in the water, but its body was still closing up. After a dozen breaths, he could see its tail just now. Because it was so close, he could even see the fine white scales on its body. He raised his sword and escaped. When he was in midair, he summoned the sword ray and flew away. He looked down and saw that in the thick sea of fog, the Jiao dragon's head and tail were faintly discernible. It darted here and there, but did not come up. He heard from Tao Zhenren that the weapon in the formation was called the Spirit Prisoner Pot. There were 8 Jiao dragon souls sealed inside. When released together, it had the power to overturn rivers and seas. However, with Lu Yuanxing's cultivation, he could only control 2 of them. He could not use the power of the formation. Otherwise, even people from the heavenly abode would be trapped inside. As long as the formation was not broken, it would not die. Hence, he did not have the intention to fight it. At this moment, a flash of lightning flashed across the sky. It was as bright as day, and then it was dark again. He looked up and saw thunderbolts in the sky. The golden snakes danced and jumped, as if they were preparing for a thunderbolt. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then flicked his sleeve, and a speck of starlight flew out. The light spun faster and faster. Then, Chapter 217. The wind and rain broke through the formation rapidly, reaching a height of over 2,000 zhang. The light dispersed, revealing a palace the size of a small city. With a leap, he entered the Star Pivot Flying Palace and arrived above the main hall. With a shake of the talisman, layers of restrictions spread out and enveloped the flying palace. At this time, there was a sudden explosion in the clouds, and lightning struck down, continuously striking the Star Pivot Flying Palace. However, this thing was made by the Qinsong school for the top 10 disciples, so it was the most sturdy one. At this time, it was driven by his Yuanying cultivation. Therefore, although the thunders were like hail and rain, it was not shaken at all. Zhang Yan sat cross-legged in the main hall. No matter how hard the wind blew, the rain pounded, the thunder roared, and the lightning flashed, he remained calm. Not to mention that his mana was dense, like a bottomless pit. There were hundreds of bottles of elixirs in this flying palace. If he defended it with peace of mind, it would not be a problem for him to hold on for 3 to 4 months. However, those demon soldiers did not have his mana. Even if they had true weapons to hold the formation, if there was no one to control it, it would not be able to operate. Zhang Yan's face showed a hint of mockery. If it was not for the fact that he and Tao Zhenren already had a plan, he would like to see who would be the first to give up. After waiting for a full 2 hours, a clear light suddenly flew up from mysterious Spirit Island and entered the formation. After passing through the fog and sea, it flew towards the Star Pivot Flying Palace. Zhang Yan seemed to have noticed it, and opened a door in the restriction, letting the spiritual light in, and let it land in front of him. He focused his attention and saw that it was a pearl the size of a thumb. It faintly glowed with spiritual light, smooth and jade-like, full and bright. He reached out and took the pearl in his hand. In the dense fog, he saw a cluster of light rushing up in front of him. Tao Xinren's doppelganger appeared and smiled at him. He said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, just now, I have already calculated the location of the formation door. Follow the direction of my spiritual pearl and you can go to the formation door. As long as you destroy the people in charge of the formation will collapse on its own." When Zhang Yan came here, Tao Xinren had already predicted that the 300,000 demon soldiers of Reef Manor were not just there to look at. They would definitely be able to set up a large formation in case of any accidents. Therefore, the two of them had already agreed that if Lu Yuanxing set up the formation, Zhang Yan would only need to hold on for a moment. Tao Xinren would be able to deduce the method to break the formation on the island, and then use his strength to break the formation. If there was a chance, then he would try to snatch the true weapon. As long as the formation was broken, Reef Manor would no longer be able to stand on the Eastern Sea. Zhang Yan was confident that he had the Flying Star Pivot Palace in his hands, so he dared to agree to this matter. However, he did not expect that Tao Xinren would be able to deduce the formation so quickly and find the method to break the formation so quickly. He immediately laughed and said, "Please guide me, Tao Xinren." Tao Xinren nodded slightly and his figure suddenly disappeared. The pearl floated in the air again and after circling once, a spiritual light shot into the formation. Zhang Yan did not hesitate and used the talisman in his hand to shake off the Flying Star Pivot Palace. Dense thunder and lightning wove, and he followed the spiritual light. When he went into the formation, he saw countless strange beasts with dragon heads and tiger bodies pouncing towards him from all directions, trying to ram into the flying palace. These strange beasts were formed from the formation's spiritual energy. They were formed from the spiritual energy of the people in the formation, and they could not be killed. Therefore, he did not care about them at all. As long as they got close to the flying palace, they were all blocked outside by the restriction. After traveling for an unknown amount of time, the spiritual pearl stopped in the air and the scene in front of him suddenly changed. At this time, the haze had dispersed and about a mile in front of him, there was a spell altar made of stone. A golden-armored demon general stood on top of it with a small flag in his hand. He was waving it back and forth according to the method. Below the altar, there were no less than 30,000 demon soldiers who raised their flags and shouted in response. Seeing him suddenly barge in with a flying palace, after the initial shock, they panicked. Zhang Yan was not in a hurry to make a move. After thinking for a moment, he smiled and waved his hand, scattering the water element true light. Water rippled and rumbled. Thousands of bloodline goldworms rushed out at the same time. They seemed to have smelled blood and rushed towards the demon soldiers impatiently. Although the cultivation of these demon soldiers was low, when they gathered together, they were not weak. Naturally, they were not willing to wait for death. Under the pressure of the demon general, they once again formed a formation. As they waved their flags, a clear light was emitted from the spell altar, and the sound of explosions did not stop. However, when the group of bloodline goldworms spread their wings, a circle of blood-red lights surrounded their bodies, flowing like water. When the clear light fell, it was like a feather hitting the water, not creating a single wave. When they rushed to the front of the demon soldiers, the swarm of worms suddenly sped up and rushed forward fiercely, like tigers entering a flock of sheep, crazily devouring them. At first, these 30,000 demon soldiers were barely able to hold on under the leadership of the demon general, but after the demon general was eaten by dozens of golden worms, they could no longer maintain the formation and collapsed, scattering in all directions. Zhang Yan did not care about the bloodline goldworms and let them eat to their heart's content. He activated the flying palace and followed the spiritual pearl to another formation door. As long as he found the correct formation door, this formation was not difficult to break. In less than an hour, he had already broken through 8 large formations without spending much effort. Apart from the first formation, all the remaining demon soldiers and demon generals were collected by him using the water element true light. He did not collect these demon soldiers to feed the bloodline goldworms, but he had a plan. If he could really obtain the true treasure, he could then tame the demon soldiers and reconstruct the formation. However, he did not leave any of the demon generals alive and killed them all. At this time, Tao Zhenren's voice sounded in his ear. Fellow Taoist Zhang, in front of us is the 9th formation door. After breaking through this formation, we can enter the formation. That is where Lu Yuanxing's main altar is located. After Zhang Yan destroyed 8 altars in a row, the fog in the formation had dissipated by more than half. The remaining few were no longer a hindrance. Even the strange beasts formed from transcendence energy were sparse, not as boundless as before. After flying for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, he saw an altar in front of him. He knew that he had reached the destination. His eyes flashed, and he no longer sat in the flying palace and walked out from it. Facing the 30,000 demon soldiers under the altar, he smiled faintly, raised his hand, and was about to release the water element true light to collect them. The one guarding this formation door was Lu Changsu. He already knew that the demon generals were inferior to him. When he saw that Zhang Yan was about to attack again, he was instantly scared out of his wits. He knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. Taoist Zhang, don't do it, don't do it. I am willing to surrender with my troops and be your mount. If I violate this oath, I will be destroyed by the heavens and the earth. As soon as he finished speaking, he kowtowed a few times, then leaned forward and revealed his true form. It was a dragon whale covered in dragon scales, with hedgehog bones on its spine and a single horn on its head. From head to tail, it was more than 500 feet long. Its back was black like iron, and it arched like a grave. Its 2 fins were as wide as oars, carrying smoke and clouds, and the sound of wind and thunder could be heard. When Zhang Yan saw the horn on its head, he knew that it was a mutated species of dragon whales. It was not something that those host-seeking whales could compare to. Moreover, there were already 5 rings on its horn, which meant that this dragon whale was at least 500 years old and could already transform into its true form and fly. After thinking for a while, he leaped over and landed on its head. He patted the horn and said with a smile, "Since you are sincere, then follow me to the main formation." Lu Changsu's body trembled, but he did not dare to disobey. With a roar, a cloud of smoke rose from the belly of this dragon whale's fins, and it flew into the sky. He was originally a member of the Lu clan, so he was already familiar with this formation. Without any instructions, he flew towards the center of the formation with familiarity. After flying for a while, Zhang Yan saw a 30 feet tall platform with flags on it. There were tens of thousands of demon soldiers around it. Lu Yuanxing and the golden-robed elder were standing together, and they seemed to be protected by those demon soldiers. In order to show his loyalty, Lu Changsu said, "Spiritual Master, Manner Master Lu has refined a supreme treasure that can injure enemies from dozens of miles away. It can be said to be indestructible, so you must be careful." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He activated his Xian Qi, and with a rumble, Yuanying leaped out from the top of the door. This Yuanying's body was golden, and it shone brilliantly, making it hard to distinguish his face. Behind him, there was a cloud of 5-colored light that constantly rotated. He stepped forward and bowed, saying with a smile, "Manner Master Lu, let's see where you can hide this time." When Lu Yuanxing saw the dragon whale beneath Zhang Yan's feet, he couldn't help but reveal a sorrowful and angry expression. After Zhang Yan broke through the outer formation and came here, he knew that the situation was hopeless. After this battle, the Reef Manor would probably cease to exist. He laughed angrily and said, "Zhang Yan, don't be too proud of yourself. Today I will fight you to the death. To be continued, I welcome you to vote for me." Chapter 481. Zhang Yan didn't want to talk to Lu Yuanxing at all. His eyes flashed and he pointed with his fingers. A sword ray flew out, but halfway through, it suddenly split into 16 sword rays. They let out a series of whistling sounds as they tore through the air. Lu Yuanxing flipped his hand and placed a pearl on top of his head. The pearl immediately released a moonlight that shone on the ground. This light seemed gentle, but any sword light that fell upon it felt like it was striking steel. Sparks flew in all directions, and the sound of metal clashing rang out incessantly. He opened his mouth and let out a long howl. He clenched his fists and two clouds moved quickly above his head. The altar shot out a pillar of light and a Yuanying emerged. It stood tall like a mountain and was abnormally tall. It almost occupied the entire altar. This nascent soul's entire body was glossy, translucent, and extremely bright, causing it to seem like crystalline jade. As soon as it appeared, it created an eye of a vortex out of thin air with it at the center, and it was like a whale swallowing the ocean. The enormous expanse of seawater beneath its feet was sucked up by this enormous force and converged towards it, causing it to reveal numerous gorgeous rays of light. Zhang Yan felt his body shake and the ground under his feet loosened. It was as if his limbs were being dragged and he was about to sink into the whirlpool. He hurriedly used the Taishan True Light and the five-colored light behind him spread out. The yellow light fell down and in a split second, there was a huge force that pressed down on his body. Previously, when the Lu Yuanying elder used the 9 phases swallowing stars, supernatural power, he needed to concentrate and store power for a moment. However, in that short period of time, he was suppressed by Zhang Yan's tide-like attacks. Until the end of the battle, he still couldn't use this Dao technique. However, Lu Yuanxing was the Manor Lord of the Reef Manor. He was completely different from the others. He had his own secret inheritance and had already borrowed the 10,000 years profound Cold Moon Evil Qi into his Xian technique. To make up for this shortcoming, when facing an enemy, the moment the Yuanying was used, the supernatural power would automatically appear and no one could stop it. Lu Yuanxing relied on himself as a Yuanying second-tier cultivator. He constantly urged his transcendence energy and this huge current became stronger and stronger. Waves rolled between heaven and earth. Within 100 miles of the sea, the weather changed and huge waves were set off. Whistling sounds filled the air as a hurricane and torrential rain swept over. If they continued to fight like this, both sides would just be competing in terms of magic power. Although Zhang Yan was a Yuanying first-layer cultivator, his mana was not much weaker than Lu Yuanxing's. However, when he was fighting, he didn't want others to take control of the situation, so he secretly made a hand seal. Yuanying moved and reached out with his hand. Suddenly, he turned into a cloud of smoke and condensed it into a 1,000 feet large hand. It slammed down with the force of a mountain. Lu Yuanxing's expression froze as he shouted, "Where are the guards? Hurry up and protect him." The last 30,000 demon soldiers surrounding him were the elites of the mansion, and among them were 1,000 whale guards. Hearing his orders, they hurriedly waved the banners on the spell altar. Jade waves of water rolled up and surged up continuously. The mysterious yellow hand slapped down, but it was blocked by the force of the water. After a few collisions, the sky shook with a loud sound. However, it couldn't break it. Zhang Yan saw that the mysterious yellow hand couldn't work, so he didn't persist. With a wave of his sleeve, 365 drops of serene heavy water flew out and rushed forward. The heavy water was as black as ink and was not eye-catching. When it moved, it didn't have any color. Lu Yuanxing only thought that it was formed by his transcendence energy, so he didn't think much of it. On top of his head, Yuanying opened its huge mouth and swallowed all the heavy water. He placed it into his stomach and wanted to circulate it to end this matter. The 9 phases swallowing star divine art was extremely powerful. Even if it was a Yuanying cultivator, once he entered his stomach, he wouldn't be able to get out. At most, it would take 3 to 4 months, at least 10 days. It would be able to dissolve the blood essence of the flesh and blood, and the true essence of the entire body would be refined into a ball of essence qi. From then on, the power of the divine art would increase again. To reach the stage, he didn't know how many cultivators he had swallowed, so he naturally didn't care about this serene heavy water. Who knew that just now, when he swallowed it in, his face changed slightly. He felt that this heavy water was actually as heavy as a mountain, and it was hard to refine it in a hurry. Moreover, it was not obedient, it started to move left and right in his stomach. It actually made him feel like he was drunk, his legs were a little weak, and he couldn't control it no matter what. At that moment, he couldn't care about anything else. He hurriedly circulated his transcendence energy and moved it for a while. Just now, he was barely able to suppress the heavy water. While he was busy here, Zhang Yan clearly felt that the pulling force around him had suddenly decreased. He immediately saw the flaw, so how could he miss this opportunity? His eyes flashed slightly, and with a point of his finger he sent out the 5 spirits white carp shuttle, wanting to take this opportunity to break the formation in front of him. As soon as the shuttle appeared, the golden scales on its body emitted a bright light. It wasn't affected by the 9 symbols' magical powers. In a flash, it rushed to the front of the formation and plunged in. In an instant, there were a few explosions. This shuttle moved like a hot knife through butter, and 4 formation doors were broken by the shuttle. When it reached the 5th formation door, its momentum was just now, it was slightly slower. Lu Yuanxing's eyes glanced over, and when he saw how fierce this shuttle was, he couldn't help but change his expression. Looking at this momentum, if he let this treasure be, it wouldn't take long before it broke through all the formation doors and rushed in front of him. But right now, he was suppressing the serene in heavy water that was constantly colliding in his body, and he couldn't spare any attention to take care of the formation. So he turned around and called out, "Third uncle, I'll have to trouble you to hold the formation for me." The golden-robed old man had just swallowed a few pills, and recovered a little of his vitality. When he heard this, he stood up and said, "Yes, Manor Master, don't worry." His arm had been chopped off by Zhang Yan, so he could only hold a banner with one hand. With a leap of his feet, he turned into a ray of light and jumped into the formation. After standing in the main position, the formation's spiritual opportunity turned, and in an instant, there was a strong wave of spiritual qi that blocked the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle's momentum. The shuttle swung its head and tail, and when it wanted to use force to move forward again, the qi suddenly changed again. It was like a continuous cloud, and like water, it immediately diverted the shuttle's momentum. When it was about to straighten again, another strong wave of qi rushed over and blocked it. These 2 waves of yin and yang spiritual qi were constantly changing, and it didn't make things easy for him. When it moved, it became stumbling, and for a moment, it couldn't break out. Zhang Yan watched with a strange light in his eyes. Previously, he didn't know that just relying on a formation could have so many wonderful uses. Although the formation in front of him couldn't completely block the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle, it could make it unable to display its power. It was an eye-opening experience. He thought to himself, looking at it this way, even if the person controlling this formation wasn't spiritual master Yuanying, as long as the difference in their cultivation wasn't too ridiculous, it could be assumed that the weak could defeat the strong. If he had such a formation in his hands, it would be of great help. Lu Yuanxing, on the other hand, was frowning. This formation was called the positive and negative stars formation, and it was divided into 6 gates. There were strange changes of yin and yang, and it was very mysterious. It was the Reef Manor's special formation, and after familiarizing itself with it, there was no need to bring any protective talisman. Just by relying on the ocean boat and the 30,000 demon soldiers, they could come and go without fear. If it was any other talisman, as long as it wasn't a true weapon, it wouldn't be long before it would be difficult to move. However, the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle was a treasure that specialized in breaking formations, so when it entered the formation, it was still alive and kicking. But because of this, it couldn't help but restrict half of the formation's power, and the defensive power was also weakened by a lot. Lu Yuanxing thought for a while and took out a jade horn from his sleeve. It was thin and long, like a needle. This treasure was called Yuan Su horn, and it was a horn that was taken from the Lu family's cave ancestor. When it was shot out, it could chase the enemy tens of miles away. Usually when encountering an enemy, one only needed to borrow the power of the 9 phases swallowing stars to restrict the enemy a little, and then shoot out this weapon, and it would have a miraculous effect. But to deal with Zhang Yan, he wasn't in a hurry at first, and was waiting for an opportunity. He believed that his mana was stronger than the opponent, and wanted to wait until the opponent's mana was weak before shooting out. But just now, he had lost the opportunity, and he was afraid that Zhang Yan had an endless number of treasures in his hands. He was afraid that if he delayed any longer, there would be more variables, so he decided to make his move earlier. He caressed the jade horn, and threw it into the air. He chanted an incantation, and when the jade horn reached the sky, It suddenly shook and instantly turned into a million stars rain and shot down. Zhang Yan saw it clearly. He calmly waved his sleeve and threw the heaven and earth leaf above his head. The leaf spun one round, and under the golden light, everything within a radius of 100 feet was enveloped by it. When the stars' rain fell, there were only circles of ripples. He defended for a while, and waited for the force to weaken, and said loudly, "It's impolite not to reciprocate." He opened his eyes, and actually shouted loudly. He circulated his Xian power, and his fingers pointed quickly. Sounds of mountains splitting could be heard continuously, and he actually shot out 64 bolts of purple lightning in one breath. Bolts of purple lightning struck on the formation. This formation originally still had to deal with the 5 spirits White Carp shuttle, and when it suddenly suffered such a rapid attack, how could it still withstand it? Before the formation gates could even be activated, they all exploded. Like a plow sweeping through a cave, everywhere the thunder and lightning passed, the demon soldiers and demon generals were all turned into ashes. Even that elder Lu couldn't dodge in time, and was blasted into dust by several bolts of divine lightning. In just a moment, the area under the spell altar was already empty, and there was nothing left. With the protection of the heaven and earth leaf, Zhang Yan didn't have to worry about holding back at all. This time, he attacked to his heart's content, and it could be said that he had truly displayed the might of this divine art from Qinsong school. When this formation was broken, suddenly a ray of rainbow light appeared on the spell altar, and a dot of starlight climbed up and headed towards the clouds. At this time, there was suddenly a loud noise in the sky, and the seawater surged. After a long while, someone said, "Why is fellow Taoist Tao so serious? I also have 2 or 3 items like this in my residence. Since fellow Taoist wants it, then take it." There was another loud laugh, and Tao Jinren's voice sounded, "Fellow Taoist Tao has to leave empty-handed, but Carp Tribe is a big family, and I think they won't be too calculative." When Zhang Yan heard this, he was slightly shocked. So that spiritual master Chu had been waiting at the side all along, and from his tone, he was also after that true artifact, but in the end, it seemed to be obtained by Tao Jinren. He called out in his mind, and the bloodline gold worms all flew back. He then released the true light and kept them inside. He then took a step forward, and with a cool breeze, he arrived on the spell altar. At this time, Lu Yuanxing was already lying on the ground, and he was on the verge of death. Blood kept gushing out from his mouth, and when he saw Zhang Yan coming over, his eyes were filled with hatred. Zhang Yan pondered for a while, and did not kill him. He also released a ray of water element true light, and kept him inside. Then he leaped up, and turned into a ray of light. After a few breaths, he returned to the front of the Hall of Ancestors on Mysterious Spirit Island. Without needing to report, he went inside. When he arrived at the main hall, he saw that Tao Jinren was sitting with a 15 or 16-year-old charming girl. Her cheeks were snow-white, and her eyebrows were curved. However, in her eyes, there was an unknown amount of vicissitudes of life. She looked back at Zhang Yan and said in a deep voice, "Old man Tao, I see that you are proficient in formations, and just now, I am willing to seek shelter. If you want to give me away, then I will go somewhere else." Chapter 482. When a transcendent artifact reached the level of a true artifact, even if it went deep into the mountains and lived a carefree life for hundreds of years, nothing much would happen to it. However, if it was not refined by an expert for thousands of years, the true spirit would be hard to be permanent under the wear and tear of time. Therefore, after the original owner passed away, if possible, he still hoped to find someone he could entrust it to. After the Lu clan was destroyed, the fine prisoner pot came to seek refuge with Tao Jinren. Tao Jinren was the master of a clan, the founder of a clan, and also a Taoist paradise master. He was also skilled in the path of formations, so he was naturally a good choice for this true artifact. However, when it heard that it was going to be given to someone else, the transcendent artifact immediately resisted. It had a feeling of dissatisfaction that said, "I originally had my heart set on the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch." Tao Jinren took a few glances at the girl. Seeing that she was unhappy, he smiled and said, "Since you are not willing, I will not force you. Come with me." As soon as he lifted his hand, a bright light shone down. Seeing that he had loosened his grip, the young girl revealed a joyful expression. She did not resist, but with a shake of her body, she transformed into an exquisite jade pot, allowing herself to be sucked away by him. However, when she was in Tao Jinren's hand, an angry and panicked voice suddenly came out. "Old Tao, what is the meaning of this? Why are you trapping me?" Tao Jinren did not speak and expressionlessly cast a few spells on it. The jade pot trembled continuously as if it was going to fly away, but it could not escape. The girl's voice became weaker and weaker, and in the end, there was no more breath. Tao Jinren saw that she was no longer struggling and smiled faintly. He threw it into his sleeve and nodded to Zhang Yan. He said with a pleasant expression, "Dao friend, you have done a matter for my clear feather sect. I had originally planned to repay you with this true artifact, but this person is usually arrogant and unruly. I have to discipline him. After he is tamed in the future, I will repay you." He had originally intended to give this treasure to Zhang Yan to repay the favor he owed. As for this spirit prisoner pot, he actually did not value it very much. He just did not want it to fall into the hands of spiritual Master Chu for no reason, lest he had an extra hand for no reason. Now that Reef Wall Prefecture had been eliminated after this battle. Furthermore, it could shock the Eastern Sea. The Clear Feather sect would have at least 100 years of peace. In the future, when Shao Chen refined his own true weapon, it would not matter whether he had this treasure or not. However, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Most of these treasures are uncontrollable. I have no use for them." There weren't many Dharma treasures and true spirits that had good tempers. Someone like Child of Mountain River was indeed rare. Moreover, the fine prisoner pot had followed the Reef Manor for thousands of years. Coincidentally, he was the one who destroyed the Reef Manor. It was debatable how much this treasure could contribute to his family, since he wasn't willing to follow him. Otherwise, even if he invited him back, he wouldn't be able to use him, so why bother coming here to cause trouble for himself? Tao Jinren saw that he really wasn't willing to accept it and didn't say any courteous words. He didn't mention it anymore, sighing and saying, "Since this matter doesn't work out, then I can only find other things to thank you. Does fellow Taoist have anything that you like in my Clear Feather sect?" Zhang Yan thought about it. When he raised his head, his eyes shone brightly and he said solemnly, "I am willing to learn from spiritual master about the Tao of formations." Tao Jinren looked at him deeply and then laughed. "Since fellow Taoist wants to learn, then Daoren won't hide it. How about this? I have an ancient book here. I got it from the Celestial Abode and it is called Hui Heng Detailed Book. I can give it to you." He took out a golden page from his sleeve, and with a flick of his finger, it flew out as light as a feather. Zhang Yan raised his hand to receive it and pinched it with his fingers. He felt that the page was soft and tough, like gold but not gold, like silk but not silk. With a rough glance, there were densely packed inscriptions arranged on it. It was obvious that it was an ancient book. The inscriptions on the page might be a headache for others, but for him, it wasn't much of a hindrance. He just needed to spend some time to deduce it, so he didn't look at it in detail and put it away first. He bowed and said, "Thank you, spiritual master, for teaching me." Tao Jinren waved his hand and smiled, saying, "There's no need to thank me. This Taoist book is difficult and profound, so it isn't easy to learn. I have another book here called Elements of Formations. It goes from complex to simple and discusses the evolution and transformation of formations. Fellow Taoist can take it and read it. If there's anything you don't understand, you can come back to me." He waved his sleeves and gave him another inconspicuous Taoist book. From his words, Zhang Yan could tell that Tao Jinren didn't understand this Elements of Formations and was afraid that he wouldn't be able to learn more advanced formations. Moreover, this book might be something that Tao Jinren learned himself. Zhang Yan immediately stood up and received the book solemnly. Seeing that he had kept it, Tao Jinren changed the topic and smiled, saying, "Just now, I saw that Lu Changsu sought refuge with you. Can you lend him to me for a while?" Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He was quick-witted, so he understood the meaning behind Tao Xinren's words. Although the Reef Prefecture was almost destroyed in the battle, the Lu clan had been accumulating for 10,000 years, so they should still have a lot of treasures. Thinking that this was Tao Xinren's intention, he smiled and said, "Spiritual master, feel free to order him around." Tao Xinren nodded and didn't bother with pleasantries. He waved the rui in his hand and the talisman flew out of the palace gate. Just now, when Lu Changsu saw how Zhang Yan destroyed the formation with just a lift of his hand, he was glad that he made the decision earlier. After that, Zhang Yan went straight to Mysterious Spirit Island but did not take care of Lu Changsu. Lu Changsu was a little nervous. He had already made an oath, so he didn't dare to leave and only paced back and forth outside the island. Suddenly, a ray of light shone down and enveloped him. Then, he couldn't help but stand up and head towards the ancestral hall of Mysterious Spirit Island. When his feet touched the ground, he saw that both Zhang Yan and Tao Xinren were in the hall. He was shocked and quickly kneeled on the ground, trembling in fear and didn't dare to make a sound. Tao Xinren said slowly, "Lu Changsu, I want to subdue the remnants of the Reef Prefecture. Are you willing to be the vanguard?" Lu Changsu glanced at Zhang Yan and saw that he didn't have any objections. He quickly said, "I am willing to lead the way." Tao Xinren said, "Take my talisman and go find my third disciple, Wang Yingfeng. She will tell you what to do." Lu Changsu hurriedly agreed. Seeing that there was nothing else for him to do, Zhang Yan wanted to go back and read the Taoist books. He stood up and said, "If there is nothing else, I will take my leave first." Tao Xinren nodded and said, "There is a beautiful manor at the back of the mountain of Mysterious Spirit Island. When the sect was established, I had meticulously renovated it and infused it with spiritual qi. It is an excellent place to cultivate one's mind and mind. If you don't mind, you can go there to cultivate." Zhang Yan bowed and thanked Tao Xinren. After that, Tao Xinren instructed a servant to bring him to the side palace. The beautiful manor was a quiet and elegant side palace. There was a spring and flowers bloomed all year round. After Zhang Yan followed the servant into the manor, he saw a peach forest in front of him. The peach trees were fragrant and beautiful. The spring water flowed around and the scenery was perfect. He was quite satisfied with the scenery. After walking one round, he sent the servant away and walked in. After walking for less than 100 steps, he saw a building in the forest. The black roof of the pavilion was covered with pink flower petals and there was no dust on the red lacquer railing. There was a stone table and 3 stone stools that were carved into the shape of a squatting stone frog. It was quite elegant. He walked into the pavilion and sat on the stone stools. He took out the book, Formation Essentials, and opened it on the table to read. The Tao of formation relied on the 3 forces of heaven, earth, and man. Cultivators usually called them the formation of heavenly virtue, formation of earthly virtue, and formation of mortal virtue. The formation of heavenly virtue was illusory. Legend had it that it was born from the primordial world since the beginning of the world. It even had the effect of reversing the universe and mixing yin and yang. Therefore, the book only had a few words about it and he did not read it in detail. The book talked about the formation of earthly virtue. Zhang Yan had come into contact with this type of formation the most. It relied on the terrain of the mountains and rivers, the spiritual essence of the spiritual veins, and complemented it with magical tools that borrowed the spiritual essence to lay down restrictions. If someone from the outside wanted to break through the formation, it would be the same as shaking the heaven and earth. Unless one was a powerful cultivator, it would be impossible to do so. For example, the restriction formations of the caves of the various families in the Qinsong school were like this. However, for cultivators, this was only a dead formation. Once they left the cave, they would not be able to protect themselves. Its use was too limited because there was a living formation within the formation of heavenly virtue. This method used a great magical power to refine the famous mountains and rivers and lakes into a small space. However, this method required great divine power and great luck. Even if several heavenly passage masters were gathered, they might not be able to refine it. Zhang Yan only heard that the Heaven Mending Pavilion, one of the 10 great mysterious sects, seemed to have such a formation in their possession. Because of this, the sect leader could bring the spiritual cave with him and wander as he pleased. His whereabouts were uncertain, and often, no one knew where the sect was. This type of formation could only be found and not sought. It was not something a normal cultivator could use. Therefore, there was another method within the living formation, which was to gather the essence of the heaven and earth and imitate the shape of the mountains and rivers. Although it could not compare to the formation of the heaven-mending pavilion, once it was refined, its power was not small. There were even cultivators who only studied one type of formation for their entire lives. Through the teachings of a master and his disciple, they continuously changed and improved, making the formation even more powerful. In the book, Array Essentials, there were several types of array diagrams listed. At the bottom, there were even the refining methods and where to collect the essence. It was all clearly explained. However, Zhang Yan shook his head. He wanted to study formations. In the long run, it was to avoid the devil's calamity. But right now, he wanted to help himself before the sword competition of the 16 sects. Refining a formation was not something that could be done overnight. The Qingping mist formation, in Luo Qingyu's hands, took a lot of effort. Just now, he was able to refine it. He did not have the mood to pay much attention to it, so he did not look at it. If he continued, he would be talking about the formation of human virtue. He could not help but be more focused. The Fu Kuan Si strength formation and the reverse star formation were arranged by more than 300,000 demon soldiers in the Reef Prefecture. Logically speaking, the more familiar the person who set up the formation, the more powerful the formation would be. If the person who set up the formation had a higher level of cultivation and had a good formation tool, it would be even more effective. Previously, Zhang Yan had his eyes on this formation. Therefore, he took in more than 200,000 demon soldiers. This way, he would not need to spend too much time to arrange a formation. As for the fact that there was no true weapon to suppress it, it did not matter. The formation of human virtue was about the word human. He did not need it to have any earth-shattering power. As long as he had one more method to deal with the enemy, he would have achieved his goal. Even if he had to give up all the demon soldiers, it did not matter. After all, it was for nothing. Just that when he thought of this, his expression changed slightly. He flipped the book to the page of the formation. His eyes flickered, as if he had an idea at this moment. Chapter 483. Just now, Zhang Yan had a flash of inspiration. He suddenly remembered that the proper earth virtue array was to refine the mountains, rivers, and rivers into the map. Those who did not have the ability to do so could only draw the mountains and rivers and move the spiritual qi to set up the array. Although he didn't have the time to do it, he had a true weapon by his side, and it was innately able to carry the mountain and river projection, which was somewhat similar to the formation diagram. If he could use this treasure to set up a formation, would he be able to evolve the formation diagram? He pondered for a while and thought about it again and again. In the end, he shook his head. Even if this path could be taken, it was not something that he could achieve with his current attainments in arrays. It would not be too late to make plans after he understood the array essentials and the Hui Heng detailed book in the future. However, other than that, he had another idea. Without the essence prisoner pot, using the mountain river map as a replacement for the array might be feasible. The essence prisoner pot relied on the essence of 8 water dragons to hold the array. Although Lu Yuanxing's cultivation was not good enough and he could only control 2 water dragons, it did not hinder him from using this array. At most, he could not display the full power of this array. Although the mountain river map did not have any essence, it could absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Zhang Yan thought that he could take some spiritual veins of the mountains and rivers and plant them in the mountain river map. Although it could not be compared to the 8 water dragons, it should be enough to set up an array. After thinking for a while, he flipped the book further. There were 8 arrays in the earth virtue array. He looked at them one by one. After a few glances, he finally chose one of them, the 6 return earth leaping array, and memorized it. When he was on Kuan Island, he had a rough understanding of arrays. There were some mysteries in this array. He could not understand the intricacies at a glance, but if he wanted to set it up, he could barely do it. The reason why he chose this array was because the other 7 arrays were all about variations. Only this array relied on the number of people to win. He had more than 200,000 demon soldiers under him, and he could not waste them. He looked at the array a few more times. After thinking for a while, he thought that he should find a place to set up the array and try it out. However, there were more than 10,000 people. The 200,000-odd demonic soldiers could not be used in this elegant manner at all. It would also easily startle the Clear Feather Sect disciples, so they had to go outside the island to use the demonic soldiers. These demon soldiers were easy to kill, but they had to be trained. But it was also a troublesome matter, and Zhang Yan did not want to waste his energy on it. Fortunately, he had Lu Changsu as his mount. This demon was originally a demon general of the Reef Prefecture, so he should be able to do the job. It was just that he was not present at the moment. They could only wait for him to return before they could make arrangements. After making up his mind, he sent a flying talisman to Tao Zhenren's place while he sat in the manor patiently studying the theory of formations. This wait lasted for more than half a month. Just now, Lu Changsu was following Wang Yingfang back to Xianling Island. After meeting Tao Zhenren, Lu Changsu heard that Zhang Yan was looking for her. She did not dare to delay and rushed to the Shuyuan villa at the back of the mountain to pay her respects. When he saw Zhang Yan, he kowtowed and said loudly, "Old master, I have returned. What do you need me to do, old master? Please tell me." Zhang Yan looked at him and said slowly, "Stand up and talk." Lu Changsu kowtowed again and stood up as instructed. He untied a pouch on his back and held it up with both hands. He said, "This is Tao Zhenren's order. I pass it to old master." Zhang Yan knew that it was something that was gathered from the Reef Prefecture. He was not in a hurry to open it and said, "This matter is not urgent. Take it with you and follow me on a trip. There is something I need you to do." Lu Changsu responded, opened his mouth and swallowed the pouch. Then he shook his body and revealed his dragon whale form, soaring into the sky. Zhang Yan stood up and leaped onto its back. The dragon whale roared and spread its fins, stirring up the wind and clouds as it rose into the sky. With a slight command from Zhang Yan, the dragon whale swayed its huge body and flew towards the east. After traveling for more than 3,000 miles, the man and the whale circled around the sea a few times. Zhang Yan saw a wide island and descended. This place was still considered to be under the boundary of Mysterious Spirit Island. However, because the island was barren, there were few plants and trees, and there was no spiritual energy, no one could be seen. The disciples on duty only came to patrol once every half a month, so it was a suitable place to use the formation. Zhang Yan got down from the dragon whale and stood on the highest rock on the island. Lu Changsu also changed back to his human form and stood beside him. Zhang Yan focused his mind and transformed the water element True Light. It spread out for a few miles and separated the 200,000 demons into 10 waves. After those demon soldiers came out, they immediately rolled all over the ground. Their mouths were full of curses and curses, making a lot of noise. Thousands of seabirds on the beach dozens of miles away were also startled and flew away, dispersing in an instant. When Lu Changsu saw this, he gathered all the mana in his body and shouted, "All of you, stop." When the demon soldiers heard this shout, they came back to their senses. Seeing that it was Lu Changsu, they naturally recognized this general of the residence and immediately quieted down. However, there were still a few muddle-headed soldiers who thought that they had never been under Lu Changsu's command and continued to curse and scold him. Zhang Yan sneered and waved his sleeve. A gust of wind blew and thousands of blood-thread golden worms appeared in the air. After these worms had eaten their fill, thousands more appeared. They buzzed and danced in the air. When they saw the demon soldiers on the ground, they couldn't help but bare their teeth. Zhang Yan looked at those disobedient demons and gave an order in his mind. Receiving permission, the blood-thread golden worms immediately rushed forward and devoured them. In the blink of an eye, they had devoured hundreds of demon soldiers. Then, they flapped their wings and swaggered back behind Zhang Yan, letting out strange cries. When the demon soldiers saw this terrifying scene, their eyes were filled with fear. They all kept quiet out of fear and didn't dare to make a sound. Zhang Yan turned around and said to Lu Changsu, "I'm going to set up a formation, so I'll need these pawns. Keep them in check." Lu Changsu patted his chest and said, "Master, leave it to me. In 3 days I will teach these bastards a lesson." At the same time, tens of thousands of miles away in the open sea, Cui Mulong was flying northward on a cloud. Not long after, he saw a snake-shaped island called Di Long Rock Market. The rocks and soil were red, and even the flowers and trees on the island were bright red. They looked like they were covered in fire, and the surrounding seawater was dyed a deep red. The spring water that flowed out from the cracks in the rocks looked like blood. This island was called Fire Mamba Island, and it was where he wanted to go. Before long, Cui Mulong arrived in front of the island. He shouted through the restriction, "Where are the Wei siblings? Cui Mulong is here to visit." A white ray rose from the island, and on it stood a fair-skinned, handsome young Taoist. The young man wore a white robe and a blackwater sash. When he saw Cui Mulong, he was delighted. He cupped his fists and said, "Senior Martial Brother Cui, why are you here? Didn't you go to Clear Feather Sect to gather information?" Cui Mulong waved his hand in annoyance and said, "Don't mention it. If I didn't act fast enough, I might not have returned. Is your sister here?" The young Taoist smiled cheekily and said, "My sister went out to visit a friend. She hasn't returned for more than 10 days. Cui Mulong cursed in his mind, "Who is she looking for this time?" He rubbed his belly and said in a muffled voice, "I've traveled for more than half a month, and my stomach is empty. I wonder if Junior Martial Brother has any delicious food in your residence." The young Taoist smiled mysteriously and said, "Senior Martial Brother, you have good food. Yesterday, when my sister wasn't around, I secretly caught a dragon carp." Cui Mulong was shocked. He looked around instinctively and whispered, "Junior Martial Brother, how can you be so bold? Where did you catch this thing?" The young Taoist waved his hand and said, "Don't panic, Senior Martial Brother. This dragon carp isn't the dragon carp you know. It's just a child that the old carp gave birth to with an unknown spirit monster. The old carp has thousands of descendants, and all of them are different species. How would it know that I caught 1 or 2 of them for a sumptuous meal?" Only then did Cui Mulong relax and scolded with a smile, "I was wondering when your abilities had improved. So that's how it is. Hurry up and cook it so that we can share it." The 2 of them went into the inner room and the young Taoist ordered a servant to cook the dragon carp. Not long after, the fragrance wafted out. It was already at the right time. He then cut the fish into sections and placed them on a basin. The 2 of them drank wine and chatted while eating. Cui Mulong took advantage of the alcohol and told the young Taoist what had happened. Hearing that he left after seeing Zhang Yan, the young Taoist couldn't help asking curiously, "Why did Senior Martial Brother do this? Could it be that this person is extremely powerful?" Cui Mulong sighed and said, "Junior Martial Brother, how would you know? I've heard of this Zhang Yan. Back then, when Clear Feather Sect was established, there was a huge battle on the sea. In this battle, Chongyue True Temple lost a true weapon called the Murderous Shadow Blade. Rumor has it that this person obtained it. This is a sharp weapon for killing. If I didn't leave, would I be waiting to be killed by him?" The young Taoist sucked in a breath of cold air and exclaimed, "This person actually has this blade in his hands?" Cui Mulong shook his head and said, "That's right. Think about that manor head Lu and 2 elders under him, a total of 3 Yuanying masters, and over 300,000 demon soldiers. I later heard that they were all killed by him. If it wasn't for that true weapon, how could he have such abilities?" He fled in a hurry but didn't dare to go back. Later, he only heard bits and pieces of news. Only then did he know that Reef Manor's Lu family was destroyed in the battle. While he was glad that he reacted quickly, he was even more certain that the murderous shadow blade was in Zhang Yan's hands. After the 2 of them devoured the dragon carp cleanly like a tornado sweeping away the clouds, Cui Mulong sighed in satisfaction and said, "This fish is still the most delicious. It eats wind, drinks dew, and swallows elixirs all day long. It seems like who can live such a simple life?" The young Taoist advised, "Senior brother Chui, ever since the elder ancestor passed away, our Mount Heng lineage has been scattered like sand on a plate. For example, senior brother He and the rest have long sought refuge with Clear Feather sect. Those who aren't willing to stay here have also gone to other continents. If you want to regain your former glory, there's only hope if the elder ancestor returns. From what I see, it's better to seek refuge with Clear Feather sect. It's better than having no foundation." Chui Mulong said unhappily, "Junior brother, why do you have to say such unambitious words? At our peak, our Mount Heng lineage had over 10,000 disciples. Even though we're scattered everywhere now, there are still over 1,000 people left on this eastern sea. Among them, there's no lack of people with profound magic power. If we were to unite, who would dare to look down on us?" The young Taoist frowned and said, "But once Reef Manor is destroyed, Clear Feather sect will definitely rise. The outer sea will probably be peaceful for many years. If we don't seek refuge with them as soon as possible, I'm afraid we won't have a chance." Chui Mulong twirled the wine cup in his hand and said with a face full of certainty, "Junior brother, you've guessed wrong. I dare to say that since that Zhang Yan has appeared, I believe it won't take long for Chongyue True Temple to make a move. Just wait and watch the show." Chapter 484. On a nameless, desolate island outside the Clear Feather sect, more than 200,000 demon soldiers were arranged in a battle formation, divided into 6 formation gates. Under each formation gate, there was a spell altar, and a person holding a flag stood on it. As the flag waved and pointed, the formation also changed accordingly. Zhang Yan had previously killed all the demon generals except Lu Changsu, and then killed more than 100 demon soldiers who did not listen to his orders. The remaining demon soldiers did not dare to make any strange movements. These demon soldiers were originally chosen from the water race of Reef Prefecture, and were not unfamiliar with how to arrange formations. After 30 days of training, the 6 Returns Earth Turtle formation was starting to take shape. Lu Changsu held the formation flag in his hand and stood on the big ship, feeling very satisfied. Now, he felt more and more that his decision to side with Zhang Yan was the correct one. Because there was nothing too profound about this formation, Zhang Yan still needed to collect the spirit veins of the mountains and rivers in order to set up this formation, so he had no time to spend here. Thus, he drew up a diagram of the formation and threw the 200,000 demon soldiers to Lu Changsu, ordering him to train them well after he left. After Lu Changsu accepted this order, he was secretly delighted. Commanding more than 200,000 demon soldiers, holding the power of life and death in his hands, and wherever his command flag pointed, all the demons under his command would obey. If this was back in Reef Prefecture, he would not even dare to think about it. Even if his cultivation had improved, if he had not been an idle elder with no military power, how could he be as powerful as he was now? Thus, in this 1 month, he had been practicing the formation day and night, doing his best. However, the daily consumption of meat for these 200,000 demon soldiers was not a small amount. Successful cultivators could consume pills and qi, but these demon soldiers could not. This was also the reason why there were so many great formations of 10,000 people, but no one was using them. It was not an easy task to feed tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Previously, he and Wang Yingfang had almost emptied the Reef Prefecture storehouse, and the fresh food they obtained was enough to feed these demon soldiers for more than 10 years. Otherwise, once they started training, many of them would have starved to death. As he waved his flag, he caught a glimpse of a group of demon soldiers moving slowly. He was furious. Just as he was about to berate, he suddenly saw a brilliant and auspicious light flying over from the horizon, and he recognized that it was Zhang Yan's light. His entire body couldn't help but shudder, and he hurriedly left his seat and knelt down before respectfully kowtowing. "Greetings, Master." As the streak of light descended, it slowly dissipated into clear qi. Zhang Yan walked out and looked down at Lu Changsu, who was kneeling on the ground. He nodded and said, "Just now, I'm watching from the top of the cloud. The formation is advancing and retreating in an orderly manner. Although there are still some unsatisfactory areas, they are only minor flaws. It has only been a month, and you have already achieved this. It can be seen that you have put in a lot of effort. Lu Changsu was praised by Zhang Yan. He couldn't help but be overjoyed, even his bones felt lighter. He chuckled and said, "Old master, although this formation has some form now, it hasn't faced an enemy yet. How much ability does it have? It's hard for me to say, I still need to find someone to test the formation." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I have already prepared for this." As he finished speaking, he raised his hand and drew a line, and a stream of flowing light appeared in front of him. He circulated his Xian technique and moved the unconscious Lu Yuanxing. Then he moved him again and threw him out of the formation. The formation had just been formed, and there were still many parts that were not perfected. Therefore, the cultivation of the person testing the formation couldn't be too high, but it couldn't be too low either. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to see the flaws. This Lu Yuanxing was originally a Yuanian cultivator, but he was now heavily injured. He had been trapped in the true light for a few days, and although he didn't die, his vitality was greatly damaged. It was best to use him to test the formation. After a while, Lu Yuanxing slowly woke up, and his expression turned from bewilderment to clarity. When he saw his surroundings clearly, he sat up from the ground and said in a deep voice, "Zhang Yan, you didn't kill me. What is your intention?" Zhang Yan took a step forward and pointed below him. "Mannerhead, can you see the formation under my feet? Just now, the formation is completed, so I wanted to ask Mannerhead Ruo to test the formation." Lu Yuanxing laughed loudly and said, "Why should I help you? If you want to kill me, then kill me. If you think I will wag my tail and beg for mercy like that brat beside you, then you must be dreaming." When Lu Changsu heard this, he couldn't help but chuckle. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Mannerhead Lu, why are you in such a hurry to deny this? Let I make a deal with you. If you can make it to the altar under my feet 3 times in a row, I will let you go and guarantee that Clear Feather's sect won't come looking for trouble with you." Lu Yuanxing couldn't help but tremble. He hesitated for a while and looked at the formation under the altar. He slowly stood up and stared at Zhang Yan. "Are you serious?" Zhang Yan said seriously, "Of course." Lu Yuanxing looked at him and said in a deep voice, "I hope you will keep your promise. When can we challenge the formation?" Lu Changsu said in a strange tone, "Mannerhead Lu, why are you in such a hurry? Once I'm done arranging the formation, I will call for you." Lu Yuanxing looked at him coldly. He didn't say anything and just sat down to adjust his breathing. After all, he had accumulated some prestige. Lu Changsu's heart skipped a beat when he looked at him. Then he felt humiliated and angry. He thought to himself, "You've already ended up like this. Do you still think I'm your lackey? I'll definitely teach you a lesson later." In front of Zhang Yan, he didn't dare to waste any more time. He waved the flag, and the demon soldiers under the spell altar all went to their respective positions, standing firmly on their own array doors. He glanced sideways at Lu Yuanxing and said, "Mannerhead Lu, you can go now. Be careful, don't make another mistake." Lu Yuanxing turned a deaf ear to his mockery. He looked down at the altar, his hands forming a seal as if he was deducing the formation door. After a while, he sneered and said, "Just a sit." After saying that, he leaped up and turned into a ray of light, disappearing in the blink of an eye. When the demon soldiers saw that it was their former Mannerhead coming down, they were in an uproar. But after a short while, they calmed down again. They already knew what happened to Reef Manor. Moreover, they were originally part of the Lu clan, so they didn't have much loyalty to Lu Yuanxing. Lu Changsu waved the flag in his hand and instantly activated the formation. The main altar was also moved to another place in the blink of an eye. After Lu Yuanxing entered the formation, he carefully probed it at first. Then, he realized that the formation was only in shape and seemed to be lacking something. Thus, he couldn't activate the formation's power. With a quick thought, he knew where the problem was, and his heart instantly calmed down as he said in his heart, "Zhang Yan, you've miscalculated. If I'm able to get out of here today, I'll surely pay a visit to my old friends, and I'll surely tear you into pieces in the future." With a shake of his shoulder, he activated the protective treasure light. Ignoring the heavy waves of formation aura, he found the location of the formation and walked inside. In less than 2 hours, he found the main altar. He couldn't help but reveal a happy expression. He leaped onto the altar and loudly said, "Once." Zhang Yan didn't seem surprised at all and said, "Manor-head Lu, why don't you rest for a while before trying to break through the formation?" Lu Yuanxing waved his hand and snorted, "No need. I'm in a hurry to leave." Zhang Yan nodded at Lu Changsu. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't seem to be blaming him, Lu Yuanxing calmed down a little. After thinking for a while, he thought about the few loopholes and shortcomings just now had. He walked to the side of the altar and rearranged the formation. This time, he didn't mock Lu Yuanxing anymore. He stretched out his hand and said, "Manor-head Lu, please." Lu Yuanxing leaped off the altar again, but this time, it was much more troublesome than the last time. It took him 6 whole hours, and just now, he was able to break through the formation. When he returned to the main altar, his legs wobbled a little due to the exhaustion of his essence. Only then did he manage to steady himself. He glanced at the two of them and said in a low voice, "One more time." Zhang Yan stood on the altar, still calm and unruffled. He smiled and said, "Manor-head, you're indeed well-versed in this. It really wasn't easy to trap you. For the 3rd time, I'll have to use some tricks." Lu Yuanxing sneered, "Show me what you've got. If you don't, I'm afraid you won't have another chance." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Manor-head, you can leave the altar now." Lu Yuanxing was startled. He asked in surprise, "I just broke through this formation. Are you not going to rearrange it anymore?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "There's no need." Lu Yuanxing threw his head back and laughed. "Zhang Yan, open your eyes wide and watch carefully. Watch how I break you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and charged back into the formation. This time, Lu Changsu was still not prepared. He couldn't help but complain in his heart. He hurriedly walked to the altar and waved the flag. For hours later, a loud rumble could be heard from the bottom of the altar. It was as if the earth was splitting and the mountains were collapsing. From afar, a streak of light could be seen rushing back and forth from the formation. It was obvious that it would not be long before it reached the main altar. Lu Changsu's expression changed and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Seeing his anxious expression, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't worry. Lu Yuanxing is a Yuanying cultivator. I didn't expect you to trap him." Lu Changsu was stunned. He couldn't figure out what Zhang Yan meant. He stammered, But, Master, are you going to let him go just like that?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I've seen it clearly. The previous 2 formations were because there was nothing holding the formation back. Just now, he can easily pass through them." He reached into his sleeve and took out a scroll. "Take this mountain river scroll and place it on the main altar. It will be very effective." For the past month, he went to the outer endless sea and used the mountain river scroll to collect several spirit veins. It was for today's use. However, he also realized that without the support of the mountains and rivers, these spirit veins would disappear on their own even if they were stored in the mountain river scroll. Moreover, the more they were used, the less they could be used. It was a problem that could only be solved in the future. Lu Changsu took it and turned around to put the scroll behind him. At this moment, the mountain river scroll trembled. The scroll slowly opened and released a golden light that soared into the sky. Shadows of several islands appeared in it. After a while, they turned into spiritual energy and dispersed in all directions. After a while, they gathered in the center. It was as if there was a towering mountain that was thousands of feet tall in the center of the formation. With the suppression of the true weapon, the formation immediately became different. When Lu Yuanxing rushed over, he was able to break through the formation with ease the previous 2 times. However, suddenly he felt his body become sluggish. The formation door that he could easily pass through at first seemed to have an additional layer of thick barrier that he couldn't break through. He changed a few formation doors, but it was the same every time. Not only that, but the formation seemed to be constantly shrinking. Seeing that there was less and less space for him to move, even his eyes were red with anxiety. Riding the light, he turned left and right in the formation, But before he could find a way out, he suddenly heard a tremor from above. Looking up, he saw the shadow of a mountain falling right on top of his head. His vision went black, and without a sound he fell from the sky. Chapter 485. Zhang Yan kept the mountain river drawing from the altar and pressed down on it. A stream of spiritual energy entered the drawing and circled around it. He shook his head. Although he successfully trapped Lu Yuanxing in the formation, he had used up more than half of the spiritual veins that he had spent a month to collect. The remaining ones could still be used for one more time. However, this was also because no one was able to collect spiritual veins on a deserted island. He did not have enough spiritual energy and could not use them for long. If he wanted to show off the power of the formation during the sword competition of the 16 sects, he would need to make more preparations. He pondered for a while and felt that this matter could not be rushed. The most important thing now was to figure out how to bring these demon soldiers with him. When Lu Yuanxing came to Clear Feather Sect, he set up a formation and came in a dignified manner. Wherever he went, the demon soldiers followed. Although Zhang Yan could use the water elemental true light to carry people, this was not the right way after all. When fighting against the enemy, the situation of the battle could be said to be ever-changing, and the slightest speed could determine life and death. How could there be any chance for him to set up the formation calmly? He had to find a good way. He thought for a long time and thought to himself, Nanhua sect is the best sect in the world at taming demon soldiers. I heard that many of their direct disciples have cultivated many demon soldiers. Tao Zhenren used to cultivate in Nanhua sect. I wonder if he can help me with this? Thinking about this, he decided to invite Tao Zhenren back to see if there was a way to solve this problem. He told Lu Changsu about this and stomped on the ground. In an instant, he rode on the strong wind and flew towards Mysterious Spirit Island. It was just a few thousand miles, and he did not need long to reach Mysterious Spirit Island. He landed in front of the Ancestral Master's Hall. The child in front of the door recognized him and did not dare to be slow. He hurried in to report and came out after a while. Ancestral Master invites Priest Zhang in to meet him. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and entered the hall. He first greeted Tao Zhenren, and after a few courteous words, he stated the purpose of his visit. Tao Zhenren said with a smile, "That's not a difficult task. Back then, when I was seeking the Tao in the Southern Flower Sect, I was obsessed with arrays and refined a set of 10,000 beasts sleeping moon banner. There are a total of 72 secondary flags, and each flag can hide more than 3,000 demonic soldiers. After I established the Clear Feather Sect, I refined another one. I don't need the original one, so I can give it to you." He opened his palm and a ray of light appeared in his palm. A flag flew out from it. It was 4 feet tall and had a bright red surface. There was a pattern of a beast with protruding fangs, and a white crescent moon was embroidered on the upper left corner. As soon as the banner appeared, he felt a fierce and barbaric aura hit him in the face. He could faintly hear the roars of strange beasts coming from it. Zhang Yan perked up and stood up to receive it. As soon as it entered his hand, he knew that Tao Zhenren had erased the blood imprint on the flag. He did not avoid it. He immediately circulated his spiritual opportunity and refined it roughly. He then raised his hand and pointed. The flag turned into a ray of light and flew up. It disappeared into his sleeves. After that, he wanted to leave. However, Tao Zhenren stopped him and said, "When will you be returning to the sect?" Zhang Yan found it strange and didn't know why Tao Zhenren would ask such a question. From the looks of it, it didn't seem like Tao Zhenren was chasing him away. He knew that there must be a reason, so he said, "I want to search for some spirit veins in the East Sea. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you for a few more days." If he wanted to collect spirit veins, he could only think of a way in the East Sea. All the famous mountains and rivers in the East Flower continent were occupied by the sects and itinerant cultivators, so it was not suitable for him to make a move. However, the East Sea was different. There were countless spiritual islands. Although it was not as abundant as the East Flower continent, there were many places without owners. As long as he was willing to work hard, it was not difficult to collect many. If it was possible, he still wanted to make a trip to the Reef Manor. If the spirit veins had not dispersed, he would collect them as well. Spiritual Master Tao said solemnly, "A few days ago, my sect's disciple reported to me that there seemed to be a disciple of Chongyue True Temple wandering outside, inquiring about fellow Taoists' news. It seemed that they wanted to find something from fellow Taoist. Chongyue True Temple is different from the Reef Manor. There are many disciples in the sect, and many of them have high cultivation. In the East Sea, it is one of the top sections. If you want to leave the Clear Feather sect, remember to be careful." Chongyue True Temple? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. His mind turned quickly and he vaguely guessed the reason. All those years ago, he'd killed an elite disciple of the Chongyue True Temple, and this had already sown enmity. It wasn't strange for the other party to target him, but if they were looking for something, then it would most likely be for the Gloom Slaughter Blade. He became wary. Chongyue True Temple would not mobilize so many people for a disciple who died many years ago. However, if it was a true weapon, then it might be different. He cupped his hands and "Thank you for your reminder, Tao Master." After sitting for a while, he took his leave. He stood on the spot and thought for a while. Then he rode on the wind and soared into the sky. Tens of thousands of miles northwest of Mysterious Spirit Island, there was a beautiful continent. It was one of the two continents under Chongyue True Temple. Looking from the sea, it was shrouded in fog all year round. However, when he reached the inner area, it was a good scene. The jade cave covered the clouds, the cliff was deep and dangerous, the ancient trees were dense, and the water flowed continuously. At this moment, hundreds of disciples were sitting in the open space of the island, listening to Elder Shenlin to explain the essentials of the sect's Tao techniques. This Elder Shen had a pair of thin eyebrows. His hair was like a knife, and he had a pair of phoenix eyes. If not for his tall figure and broad shoulders, one would think that he was a woman at first glance. Since the death of Elder Su, other than Mi Zhenren who had not shown his face for 1,000 years, his cultivation was the highest in the sect. This person's voice was gentle and long, and it was very charming. One could not help but be immersed in it, completely unaware of the outside world. The disciples were listening to him in a daze. Suddenly, they heard the sound of the jade bell. Just now, as if they had just woken up from a dream, they knew that the time had come. They stood up respectfully, bowed, and returned to their respective caves to cultivate. Shenlin Tu waited for the crowd to disperse. He sat quietly for a while, then stood up and returned to his cave. However, he seemed to have something difficult to understand. He frowned deeply and after a while, he let out a long sigh and said to himself, "I have been preaching for more than 30 years, but until now, I still have no clue. Could it be that this path really cannot be taken?" 200 years ago, he had entered the third stage of Yuanying and was only one step away from becoming a Tao Master. However, this step was as far as 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers, and it was difficult to cross. He once went to ask Mi Zhenren, but all he got was a sentence, "It's all up to fate." Shenlin Tu, however, was skeptical. This Tao Master was originally the adopted son of the Shen clan. Because of his ugly appearance, he was not liked by the clan. Later, he obtained an opportunity and became a Tao Master. Then, he moved to the distant sea to cultivate, and he even changed back to his original surname. He did not pay much attention to the disciples in the sect, so he always suspected that they were unwilling to tell him the correct path. All these years, Shenlin Tu had read many books and tried many methods, but he still could not find the way. Chongyue True Temple also had a deep foundation. There was also a method to achieve Tao in the sect, which could use the true artifact to enter the Tao realm. However, this method was too dangerous. Back then, Elder Su used this method to forcefully break through the realm with the Yin-slaying blade, but the result was not good. Not only did his 1,000 years of hard work disappear in a day, but even his primordial spirit was not saved. Elder Su had a close friendship with him, and every time he thought about this, he could not help but sigh. He sighed silently. If he still could not find the key before the end of his life, then he could only try this method again. However, although Chongyue True Temple originally had 3 great treasures in the sect, one of them was carried by Mi Zhenren, so he could not use it. As for the other one, it was enshrined in the ancestral hall, and could not be used unless the sect was in danger. As for the Yin-slaying blade, it was long gone. As he was thinking, the disciple guarding the door said from outside, "Ancestral Master, Shen Tsong is here, he is waiting outside the cave." Shen Lintu's spirit was slightly lifted and he said, "Bring him in to see me." After a while, a cultivator with short eyebrows, a big nose, and a round waist walked in with light steps. When he saw Shen Lintu, he immediately knelt on the ground and said, "Disciple Shen Tsong greets Elder Shen. I wish Elder a long life." Shen Lintu looked at him and said, "Not bad, compared to the last time you came, your cultivation has improved again. In 3 to 5 years, you can condense your dan." Shen Tsong bowed his head and said respectfully, "If it was not for Elder's nurturing, disciple would not be where I am today." Shen Lintu said, "You are a member of my Shen clan, and your aptitude is not bad. Based on sentiment and reason, I should take care of you. Fortunately, you did not disgrace me. You must remember not to be like your senior brother, relying on the sect's favor, and become complacent." In the end, not only did he lose his life, but he also gave the sect's great treasure to an outsider. Shen Tsong lowered his head and said, "Yes, disciple is here for this matter." Shen Lintu's eyes were originally half closed, but at this moment, they suddenly emitted a ray of light. He straightened his body and said, "What do you mean?" Shen Tsong hurriedly told him about how Zhang Yan single-handedly destroyed Reef Manor. In the end, he said, "I don't know who spread the news, but the reason why Zhang Yan was able to defeat Lu Yuanxing and the other 2 and the 300,000 demon soldiers was all because of our sect's killer Shadow Blade." Shen Lintu closed his eyes and seemed to be thinking. After a while, he slowly said, "I have also heard of this person. He should be a direct disciple of Qinsong School and has some ability. The Lu family's 3 people were defeated by his hands, but it may not be because of the killer Shadow Blade. But let's not care about him, we will know once we capture him and interrogate him." Shen Tsong said in shock, "Elder wants to personally act." Shen Lintu smiled proudly and said, "If he really has the killer Shadow Blade in his hands, other than me, there are not many who can handle him." Shen Tsong immediately said, "With Elder's appearance, how could that brat Zhang Yan be his opponent? It should be easy to capture him." Although his words were flattery, he really thought so in his heart. Yuanying third-grade cultivators had already faintly touched the threshold of that level. Their mana and supernatural powers were completely not something that a first-grade Yuanying cultivator could compare to. The difference between the two could not be measured in just a few miles. Shen Lintu made a hand sign and suddenly a spiritual flower rose above his head. Then, a Taoist who looked exactly like him walked out from the flower. This was the Yuanying Dharma body that he had cultivated for hundreds of years. Even if his real body stayed here to cultivate, this Dharma body could also go thousands of miles away. Chapter 486. Above the vast East Sea, Zhang Yan rode on the wind and clouds, flying towards the direction of the Reef Manor. For the past few days, he had traveled to the deserted islands within tens of thousands of miles to collect the spirit veins. He had accumulated a lot in the mountain river painting, but it was not enough to compete with the disciples of the various sects in the sword contest. Thus, he set his sights on the Reef Manor. There were no spiritual eyes on the East Sea, and the Lu family was born as a demon, so they did not have any celestial palace treasures. Thus, they spent thousands of years collecting strange soil and spiritual spring water to nurture it. Only then did they manage to nurture a spirit vein that was originally a true palace chi manor into a place that was comparable to a paradise. But if this spirit vein was left unattended, the spiritual vigor would gradually disperse, and in a few hundred years, it would become the same as those deserted islands. Zhang Yan thought that instead of that, he might as well benefit himself. After traveling for a day, he suddenly felt something strange. In front of him, there was a thunderstorm, the waves were raging, and a dark cloud was pressing down on the sea, rolling towards him. But other than the few miles under the cloud, the rest of the area was clear blue sky, and the weather was beautiful. He could see that someone was using magic, but to be able to create such a scene with mana, this person's cultivation must be very high, at least a Yuanian cultivator. He thought to himself, on the East Sea, all the Yuanian cultivators have a name, I wonder which one is this? At this moment, a cloud of smoke flew out from the thundercloud, and there were two Taoists standing on it. Their hair was in a crooked bun, and their robes were tattered, looking very pathetic. Both of them carried a strange fish that was 5 feet long on their backs, and lightning came from behind them. There were a few times when they almost caught up, and it looked very dangerous. Zhang Yan did not want to be involved, so he pushed the cloud and wanted to go around it, but the person controlling the thundercloud suddenly separated a thick black cloud and covered him. He raised his eyebrows and raised his hand to strike out a ball of strong lightning. It dispersed the cloud. But the other party was not willing to give up, and 2 more lightning struck him. He waved his sleeve. The heaven and earth leaf flew out and blocked the lightning and said, I am just passing by. I have no intention of interfering with fellow Taoist matter, please do not misunderstand. After cultivating to the nascent soul realm, most cultivators valued their own lives extremely. If it wasn't a life and death enemy or a fight over a treasure of heaven and earth, then there was no need for them to get into conflict with cultivators of the same cultivation. Normally speaking, this kind of greeting would cause the other party to stop. But unexpectedly, that person's temper was unbelievably great. He was still unwilling to believe Zhang Yan's words, so he continued to send out lightning bolts, unwilling to give up. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. He was unwilling to participate in such an inexplicable battle. Looking at the 2 Taoists who were escaping, he had an idea and chased after them. In an instant, he was behind the 2 of them, and with a wave of his sword light, he wrapped them up. He activated his magic power, and in the blink of an eye, he was 10,000 feet away. With a few more leaps, he had left the thundercloud behind. After flying for another 50 kilometers, he just now stood still on the cloud and released the 2 of them. He cupped his hands and said, Fellow Taoists, please. The 2 of them had just recovered from the shock. One of them, the thin Daoran, saw Zhang Yan and his expression changed. Zhang Yan keenly captured the change in his expression and stared at him. Fellow Taoist, you seem to have seen me before? The Daoran panicked under his gaze. He braced himself and said, Yes, yes. That day, the Reef Prefecture besieged the Clear Feather sect. I went to watch the commotion and was fortunate enough to see perfected Zhang from afar. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I see. May I know your names? Daoran hurriedly bowed and said, I don't dare. I'm Cui Mulong, and this is my junior brother, Wei Jinghui. When the young Taoist beside him knew that Zhang Yan was a Yuanian perfected one, he hurriedly came forward and bowed respectfully. Zhang Yan asked again, Who was that just now? Why did he chase after you too? Cui Mulong sighed and said, Perfected one, you may not know this, but that was a dragon carp in the East Ocean. My senior brother and I have a hobby, and that is to eat delicious food. Throughout the East Ocean, only the disciples and disciples of that old dragon carp are the most delicious. Today, I was craving for food, so I specially came out to hunt for wild food. This old demon usually hides in its cave, but for some reason, it actually came out of its nest today. If not for Perfected One's help, I'm afraid it would not have escaped with its life. When Zhang Yan saw the ball of clouds earlier, he suspected that it was a demonic cultivator. At this moment, when he heard that the person performing the technique was actually a dragon carp, he couldn't help but think in his heart. Could it be because of that reason? He had the purple jade hairpin flower that was gifted to him by Perfected One Cheng. This flower was able to attract the dragon carp from thousands of miles away, so it must be because he got too close to the dragon carp and was discovered by this old demon. Thinking about it this way, it was very likely that the old demon was coming for him, and the 2 of them were just tagged along. Otherwise, with their meager cultivation, they probably wouldn't even be able to withstand a single blow from such a great demon. His thoughts turned quickly, but he was still preparing to go to the Reef Mansion, so he had no time to deal with this old demon. He would deal with it when he returned. Cui Mulong and Wei Jinghui, on the other hand, were extremely grateful to Zhang Yan for saving their lives. They tried their best to invite him to their mansion to taste the delicacies. Wei Jinghui even said, "Perfected one Zhang, my cave mansion, Fire Mamba Island, is only about 6,000 miles away from here. My sister is also very hospitable. Although my cultivation is low and my mana is shallow, I dare to boast about my cooking skills." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I still have important matters to attend to today. After I'm done, I will definitely pay you a visit at your cave mansion." Wei Jinghui was overjoyed. He had heard about Zhang Yan from Cui Mulong and knew that he had a close relationship with the Clear Feather sect. Putting that aside, he was also a Yuanying perfected one. If he could befriend him, he would definitely be able to rely on the Clear Feather sect. Cui Mulong hesitated for a moment and said, "Perfected one Zhang, I heard that the disciples of Chongyue True Temple are looking for your whereabouts. Perfected one must be careful." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, he cupped his fist and said, "Thank you for informing me, fellow Taoist Cui. I will take my leave now." As soon as he finished, he turned around and waved his sleeve. He rode on a ray of light and leaped into the high clouds, heading east. The Reef Mansion was very easy to find. After traveling for about 2 days, he saw a magnificent palace city standing on the sea from afar. The city had 5-colored corals as its walls and black reefs as its beaches. It was a huge city that was more than 1,000 miles wide. The buildings were arranged in rows and rows, all of them exquisite. Under the morning sun, the sea was sparkling. The glazed roof tiles were bathed in golden light, bright and eye-catching. The palace and the tower in the distance were like a painting, faintly blending into the sea and sky. It was indeed a place that the Liu family had built for 10,000 years. In the center of the city, there was a sea cave that was thousands of hectares in size. It was originally the place where the oceanic ship was docked, but now it was empty. The original intention of the oceanic ship was to show the manor master's martial prowess and power when he traveled and to intimidate the Eastern Sea's water tribes. It could not change its size. As Zhang Yan thought that it was not easy to carry around, he threw it to Lu Changsu. If he returned to Qinsong School in the future, he could only give this item to Clear Feather sect as a gift, treating it as a small favor. It had been less than 2 months since the Liu family was destroyed. Though the Liu family members had already disappeared, the small wandering cultivator sects of the Eastern Sea still did not know how Clear Feather sect would deal with the ruins of the Reef Mansion. Therefore, they were still watching carefully and had not made a move to occupy it. Only a few small demons that had turned into spirits in the sea did not know what was going on. Seeing that the restrictions here had been destroyed, they thought that they had gained an advantage and occupied a few palaces, declaring themselves kings. These small demons had low cultivation and no abilities, so Zhang Yan did not pay them any attention. After circling around the city walls, he sensed that the spirit vein was under the positive sea cave. He pressed down on the ray of light and rushed down. Many of the small demons in the positive sea cave felt an incomparably strong qi activity rushing over. They all panicked and fled in all directions. After going down for dozens of miles, he reached the bottom of the positive sea cave. He saw a ball of faint light sinking into the sand, and there seemed to be another world within it. He knew that he had found the place. He opened up his sword light and entered it, turning into a rainbow as he followed the sword. When he arrived in front of the light, the sword light suddenly descended. He felt a slight sluggishness, as if he had hit some kind of obstacle. He shouted and activated his transcendence power, breaking through it. At this moment, the scenery in front of him changed. He looked around and saw that he had arrived in a jade hall that was filled with the light of pearls and pearls. It occupied an area of about 100 acres and was filled with beautiful flowers and jade grass. However, many places were filled with potholes, and it was obvious that they had been picked by people. Zhang Yan pondered, this should have been done by Wang Yingfang and Lu Changsu when they came here previously. The plants that were left behind could only be used as ornaments and had no other use. He stomped on the ground and rose with the wind. In an instant he had walked through the entire hall and found a place with the densest spiritual qi. He reached into his sleeve and took out the painting of mountains and rivers, then tossed it into the air. This painting of mountains and rivers immediately floated in the air and slowly unfolded along the scroll. In just a moment, it had unfolded to the size of 1,000 feet. Within it, countless mountains, rivers, provinces, and continents appeared. Zhang Yan made a hand seal, and the painting trembled, concealing the human provinces and cities. Only the mountains and rivers remained. Then, rays of brilliant spiritual light flew out from the earth veins, and as if they were being pulled by a suction force, all of them were cast into the painting. He was extracting the spirit veins here, but outside the reef manor, 2 cultivators in blue Taoist robes flew over. The 2 of them looked down with excitement and whispered to each other. Then, a letter flew into the sky and retreated far away. These 2 were disciples of the Chongyue True Temple. After Zhang Yan left the Clear Feather sect, he had been targeted by the disciples of this temple. However, he was a Yuanying cultivator, and most of the time, he flew above the extreme heaven. The East Sea was vast and boundless, so how could it be easy to find his whereabouts? Even if they occasionally caught a glimpse of him, by the time the news reached the temple, he would already be long gone. However, this time, he had to stay here to collect the spirit veins for quite some time. This gave the Chongyue True Temple a chance. However, after 2 days, a long rainbow flew over like a startled dragon and arrived above the hall. When the splendor opened, Shenlin walked out with a horsetail whisk in his hand. After receiving the letter, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would escape, so he quickly used his escape technique and rushed here as fast as he could. However, now that he was here, he was no longer in a hurry. He looked down, stroked his beard, and faintly smiled. He did not enter the sea point, but only took 2 steps, sat down, and patiently waited for Zhang Yan to come out. Chapter 487. Shenlin saw that Zhang Yan was refining the spirit vein. As a senior cultivator and an elder of the Chongyue True Temple, if he were to make a move now, he would be ridiculed for taking advantage of a junior. Therefore, he did not come down to disturb him, only closing his eyes and meditating on the roof of the hall. He knew that Zhang Yan was proficient in controlling the flying sword. Even if he could not win, he could escape with the sword escape. However, he was not afraid that Zhang Yan could escape. He was a 3rd-layer Yuanying cultivator and cultivated a Yuanying Dharmakaya. This Dharmakaya had already broken away from the shackles of the corporeal body. When it flew, it was like a flowing light, not inferior to the flying sword at all. Although it could not compare to the extreme sword of the Shaoqing 3 lineages, it should not be a problem for him to catch up to ordinary sword cultivators. Under the sea meridian, Zhang Yan also seemed to have sensed something. He raised his head and looked, revealing a pondering expression. However, he did not have the intention to show himself. He still sat there without moving, circulating his mana and calmly collecting the spirit vein. The 2 of them stayed in this reef manor. Although they had not made a move yet, it caused the small demons occupying the surrounding halls to be abnormally frightened. In just a few hours, they scattered like birds and beasts. A day later, all the cultivators within 100 miles of the sea region had retreated far away. 8 days passed like this. The mountain-river diagram floating in the air let out a deep and distant sound. It was like a drum in the wilderness or thunder in the deep valley. The mountain on the diagram was originally illusory, but now it was real, as if there was really a towering mountain standing in front of it. At this moment, Zhang Yan had just now collected the spirit vein under the reef manor completely. Only a little bit was left, and he did not destroy it in one go. This hall was originally filled with splendor, shining like pearls. It was like the wondrous state of immortals. However, the moment the spirit was gone, it immediately fell to the mortal world, becoming dim and completely devoid of color. Zhang Yan raised his hand and pointed. The mountain-river diagram was kept, turning into a ray of light and falling into his sleeves. Then, he shook his robe and stood up, slightly tidying his clothes. With a tap of his feet, a ray of light appeared and broke through the sea meridian, rising upwards. In just an instant he arrived above the sea. He looked down and saw Shenlin sitting on the roof of a palace a few miles away. He said, I wonder which fellow Taoist has been waiting here for several days. Are you looking for me? Shen Lin focused his eyes and saw that the strong cloud above Zhang Yan's head was as clear as a thin mist. It was obvious that it had not been condensed for long. However, his entire body was overflowing with the aura of the Tao, and there was even a strand of heroic spirit that was difficult to conceal between his brows. It just happened to be like a flying sword that was hidden in his bosom, yet revealed a sharp glow, and he was absolutely not someone ordinary could compare to. He pondered for a moment. With a wave of his horsetail whisk, a cloud of mist appeared under his feet, lifting his feather-like body midair. He stood face to face with Zhang Yan and politely said, "Daoren is Shen Lin from the Chongyue Zhenguan. I came here to look for you." Zhang Yan bowed and smiled. "So it's Elder Shen from the Chongyue Zhenguan, nice to meet you." Shen Lin also had a discerning eye. Seeing that Zhang Yan was talking and laughing calmly in front of him, he was afraid that Zhang Yan had some sort of extraordinary backing. Thus, he did not attack immediately. Instead, he thought of using words to persuade Zhang Yan. If Zhang Yan was from a small sect, he would not think about all this. Once he came out of the sea meridian, he would probably capture him and interrogate him about where the Yin killer blade was hidden. It was because Zhang Yan was a disciple of the Qinsong school that he had such concerns. The Chongyue Zhenguan stood outside of the East Sea and told their disciples that they were on par with the 10 sects of the Donghua mystical sect. However, Shen Lin knew that those words were just to put gold on their face and deceive the junior disciples. If they were to really compare, even the Lishan sect, which was ranked last among the 10 sects, was far from being comparable to the Chongyue Zhenguan. Moreover, the Qinsong school was a mystical sect that had existed for thousands of years. Therefore, it was best to be able to settle this matter safely. Therefore, he tried to slow down his tone and said, "In my Chongyue Zhenguan, there used to be an important weapon called the Yin killer blade. Back then, it was carried by a disciple of our sect, Shinmingu. Decades ago, Tao Jinren established his sect on the outer sea. In that battle, he was defeated by you. It was rumored that this blade was also taken by you. May I ask if this is true?" After he finished speaking, he glanced at Zhang Yan's face and did not move. Zhang Yan thought for a while and admitted frankly, "Yes, at that time, the Yin killer blade had fallen into the hands of I. It was the same whether he said it or not. Since this person had come from thousands of miles away, he would definitely not be dismissed with just a few words. He might as well admit it directly. As for what moves he had in the future, he would just have to wait and see." Seeing that Zhang Yan admitted it, Shen Lin's expression immediately changed. His gaze was both excited and anxious. He said, "May I know where this blade is now?" Zhang Yan said lightly, "This item is fated with a disciple of I, so it has been bestowed to him." Shen Lin frowned. He was silent for a while, then slowly said, "There is no harm in letting you know that this treasure can help Daoren open the Imperial Gate and climb the Dharma Mountain again." When Daoren heard about the whereabouts of this treasure, he hurried over. The urgency in his heart cannot be expressed in words. As long as you hand it over, we can avoid a pointless battle. At the end of his words, his expression was extremely stern. Throughout history, cultivators loathed those that obstructed their path towards the Tao the most, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were mortal enemies. He was clearly telling Zhang Yan that if Zhang Yan wasn't willing to hand over this true artifact, then he would have no way out today and could only fight to the death with Zhang Yan. He originally thought that with his identity as a third-layer nascent soul cultivator, no matter if it was cultivation or cultivation, he would be much higher than Zhang Yan. The moment he said this, he knew that Zhang Yan would feel a lot of pressure and would think about it. But he did not expect that when Zhang Yan heard this, he raised his eyebrows and laughed out loud. He said, "Friend Shen, if you want this item, you can come and get it yourself. Why waste your breath?" Shen Lin saw that Zhang Yan's answer was extremely unyielding, as if he was not afraid of a battle. His face darkened and there was a hint of anger in him. He said, "Since you don't know what is good for you, then there is no need to say more. You and I will fight here and decide who this blade belongs to." He waved his sleeve and retreated 1,000 feet away. He turned around and stood still. He waved his hand again and a two-edged flying knife about half a foot long flew out from his back. It hovered above his head. The two ends of the knife were sharp like a shuttle. The body of the knife was like jade, whiter than snow. Under the scorching sun, it gave off a cold glow. Since there was no way to negotiate, he had the intention to kill. He pointed forward and the knife turned into a white light that slashed forward. The speed of the knife was unparalleled. Shen Lintu only needed to raise his hand and it was already in front of Zhang Yan. A Yuanying third-grade cultivator was not to be underestimated. Zhang Yan had previously fought with the cult deity of Lai Xian sect. That time, he relied on the double moon peaks formation to subdue and refine it. This time, he did not have anything to rely on. Therefore, he did not dare to be careless. He made a sword gesture with his hand and there was a sound of a sword. The star's sword pill flew out and went against the knife light. Shen Lintu sneered, and with a spell, the saber split into two, transforming into two flying sabers that lined up on his left and right. He wanted to use the momentum to avoid the sword light, but the stellar sword pellet suddenly shook and also transformed into two sword lights, splitting up to face the enemy. With a series of clanging sounds, the two swords and blades clashed hundreds of times in an instant. At this moment, the flying daggers had already turned into 27, while the flying swords had shaken off 16 sword beams, unleashing their full strength to fight against them. Although they were inferior in number, relying on their flying speed, they were able to barely parry the attacks. Shen Lintu laughed and said, "You do have some skills. Let's see how you block it." He stretched out his left hand and flipped his palm to produce a ball of dense white qi. He raised his right hand and pointed at it. The ball of white qi suddenly combined and condensed into a white saber. Then he made a series of hand signs and the white qi continued to be produced and condensed into sabers. Only when there were 27 sabers did he stop. He looked forward and shook his wrist. He said, "Go." The 27 white knives flew out. He didn't join the previous battle circle but went around it, circling from the side and attacking from the empty door. Zhang Yan had fought with the disciples of Chongyue True Light more than once. He had also obtained the cultivation method of the Liyuan Yin Yang flying dagger from Beigong Hao, an elder of the Chongyue True Light sect. Therefore, he had a slight understanding of this Taoist technique. He knew that this was a profound Dharma access for killing and fighting formations. When practiced to the extreme, it could even be comparable to the art of flying swords. Therefore, he did not underestimate it. He pointed with his index and middle fingers. A ray of water appeared out of nowhere. The waves scattered and the tide surged up. The flying knives were dragged along by the water. The tip of the knives sank as if they were going to be thrown into the water. Shen Lintu snorted and silently made a hand sign. These white blades immediately shook and suddenly transformed into qi and flew away, breaking free from the restraints of the water light. When they combined again, they had already turned into a pitch-black color. Streaks of black light, like illusory shadows, instantly penetrated the water light and attacked Zhang Yan's inner circle. The yin-yang flying knife was known as the knife-hidden technique, refining yin and yang. When Shen Lintu had practiced it, the yang knife could turn into the yin knife at any time. The yin knife could also turn into the yang knife in an instant. The force of hardness and softness could be changed according to the incantation in the battle formation. This technique was the foundation of this Tao technique. The reason why Shen Lintu wanted the yin killing knife was that if he could use this knife as a yin knife and then use his mana to refine it as a yang knife, he would be able to see through the secret gate and enter the grotto heaven realm. Because of this reason, if he didn't have this item, he would not let Zhang Yan escape even if he had to chase him to the ends of the earth. Zhang Yan saw that even before the flying dagger reached him, the yin qi was already dense and his body felt like it was soaked in cold water. He swung his sleeves and took out the earth-splitting Chen Kun. When the treasure sensed the flying dagger's qi, it immediately released a 10 feet wide golden light curtain that surrounded his body. The knife's qi was extremely powerful. When it arrived in front of him, it flashed fiercely. The golden light kept shaking and rippling. However, every time it looked like it was about to break, the Qian Kun leaf would shake and solidify a little. Shen Lintu's eyes turned cold. He snorted and muttered a few gestures. He spread out his hands and shook his shoulder. 27 white knives flew out from his left shoulder. He shouted, and the knife's qi on the left and right combined in the middle. It turned into a 5 feet long yang knife that shone brightly and emitted wisps of smoke. It was different from the white knives from before. This knife seemed to be a precious weapon. He stretched out his hand and held it in his hand. He aimed at the Qian Kun leaf and slashed it. In an instant, the golden light that protected the Dharma was broken. Chapter 488. The heaven and earth leaf's golden light dispersed, and the flying daggers that were patrolling outside were no longer obstructed. They took the opportunity to rush in and slashed at Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan saw the flying knives coming at him, but he didn't dodge or avoid them. With a loud shout, he raised his hand and pointed at the sword pellet. The 16 sword lights suddenly flew up, and the 27 yang knives that were originally entangled with them were all thrown off and turned to attack Shen Lintu. Shen Lintu was also secretly shocked. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan would actually dare to disregard his defense at this moment and instead go all out to attack him. From his point of view, this was obviously the idea of attacking the enemy's weakness to force him to withdraw his killing move and relieve himself of the danger. At the same time that he admired Chen Shi's boldness and decisiveness, a feeling of ridicule arose in his heart, and he thought to himself, if it was someone else, that person might be thrown into confusion by you and struggle for a chance to win. But doing this in front of me is the path to death. His body trembled and released the treasure light that protected his body. It was like a mist that was dazzling. At the same time, he used his technique, and the jade dagger in his hand flew up. When it was in the air, it turned into 54 daggers and formed a dense net of daggers that repelled the sword rays. On the other hand, on Zhang Yan's side, the dagger aura was approaching just now. Before it could touch his body, the Jing Luo Dun Jun Bao Yu on his body had already sensed it and immediately propped up a bright light. It was released 3 feet away and blocked the attacking white daggers. The dagger ray was extremely sharp, and after repeated slashes, it actually shaved off a lot of the bright light. However, it still could not break through. Shen Lintu took a glance and could not help but let out a sound of surprise. His cultivation was high, and his flying dagger technique was not something that the disciples in the sect could compare to. Normal treasures could not block it at all. And now that he was unable to achieve the result, it was obvious that the Taoist robe that Zhang Yan was wearing was also a treasure. He frowned. If it was only one weapon, it would not be difficult to deal with it. But if it was two, then it would be a little troublesome. Unless he could defeat the enemy in one strike, it would be very difficult to take him down. Actually, with his Yuanying level 3 cultivation and the treasures in his hands, if he could gather his strength and attack with all his might, he might be able to break it. But this was only on paper. One had to know that cultivators weren't inanimate objects. They wouldn't just stand there and let others hack at them. If they sensed that something was amiss, they would dodge. This was especially so for someone like Zhang Yan, who was proficient in flying swords. He could fly and move freely, so it was even more impossible for him to have such a chance. Therefore, if they didn't come up with a good plan and continued to fight like this, even if their spiritual energy was depleted, they might not be able to determine the victor. Shen Lintu could not help but ponder. He thought to himself, although my speed isn't slow, flying through the air is this person's forte. If I chase after him, I'll be at a disadvantage. We need to find a way to trap him. While he was plotting a way to defeat the enemy, after Zhang Yan blocked the flying knife, he had already freed up his hands. He pointed upwards and swung the heaven and earth leaf in the air, releasing a wisp of cloud light. It was as if it had enveloped him and the flying daggers within. Zhang Yan let out a shout and activated the swift mystic art. He shot out several bolts of purple cloud heavenly thunder, which landed on the flying daggers. With a thunderous roar, the flying daggers were shattered and dispersed into wisps of water essence qi. He knew that the yin-yang flying daggers could be separated or combined, dispersed or gathered. As long as he did not care about them, even if no one was controlling them, these flying daggers would condense again in no time. Therefore, he took out the mountain and river diagram and tore it apart with both hands. Then, he waved it in front of the water essence chi. The water essence chi seemed to be absorbed by an invisible force and disappeared into the diagram. While Shen Lintu was pondering, he suddenly felt that the knife chi had lost connection with his mind. He couldn't help but be startled. He knew that Zhang Yan had used some unknown method to break it. He exclaimed, "Junior, good method." If the Chongyue True Temple disciple's knife chi was taken away by Zhang Yan, he would need to use the water essence chi to cast a spell to condense it. But with his cultivation, he had already broken away from the barrier. He could condense the vitality flying knife purely with his mana. He stretched out his hand and used his technique. A white gas rose from his palm. After a moment, it suddenly separated and turned into many flying knives. However, the number was more than before. There were a total of 486 knives. The cold light of the knives were like snowflakes dancing in the air. He made a hand sign and divided the flying knives into 3 groups. Each group had 162 knives. With another wave of his sleeve, one of the groups flew towards Zhang Yan. The other 2 groups of flying knives didn't come to find trouble with him. Instead, they came from the left and right and flew to the side. Looking at the situation, it seemed like they wanted to cut off his escape route. Zhang Yan looked at the momentum of the flying knives and his heart was slightly moved. Whether it was the treasured robe or the heaven and earth leaf, they could protect his body. No matter which side attacked, there wouldn't be an opening for those ordinary talismans. He didn't believe that Shen Lintu couldn't see that. But knowing that, the other party still did it. There must be a deeper purpose. Although he couldn't see it for a moment, he couldn't let the other party do as he wished. So, he didn't get entangled with the knife gleam. Instead, he used sword escape and dodged the sharp gleam. Shen Lintu, however, didn't let it go. He drove the few flying knives in a circle and formed a triangle to outflank him. It seemed like he wanted to trap him inside. Seeing such a situation, Zhang Yan was even more certain of his thoughts. Relying on the speed of sword escape, a sword gleam circled around and he was always able to escape from the circle of knives in time. Although he was flying and dodging, he wasn't blindly retreating. Instead, he was secretly looking for a good opportunity to counterattack. However, Shen Lintu didn't relax his defense just because he was a first-layer Yuanine cultivator. His defense was exceptionally tight. When he used the flying knives, he didn't release them all at once. Instead, he always left a few knife gleams behind. If he could return, he could. In addition to the protective treasure light that flowed around his body like clouds, it wasn't easy to break through. Shen Lintu did his best to activate the flying knives to intercept and chase, but he couldn't trap Zhang Yan. After several hours, he also gradually felt impatient. With a flip of his hand, he took out a silver ring. Aiming at Zhang Yan's flying direction, he threw it out. Zhang Yan had been paying attention to his movements. Before the magic treasure reached him, he shouted and used the longevity-locking cicada. A spot of clear light went straight to the treasure. With a crisp ding, it attached to the magic treasure and firmly fixed it in midair. The corners of Shen Lintu's mouth twitched slightly. He'd attacked a few times, yet all of them were dealt with by Zhang Yan using magic treasures. Moreover, every single one of those magic treasures were extraordinary, causing him to be extremely shocked. Even as an elder of the Sublime Yu True Temple, he didn't possess such abundant wealth. He thought that if he didn't use any tricks and continued to waste time like this, the outcome wouldn't be any different even if they fought for several days and nights. He couldn't help but think to himself, I originally wanted to capture this person and force the Een killer knife out. I didn't expect it to be so difficult. I might as well kill him first and then torture his spirit. He originally didn't want to fall out with Qinsong School. However, his goal couldn't be achieved, and he had no hope of achieving Dao, so he could only kill. The Donghua continent was in a great calamity now, and he didn't believe that the other party could disperse their forces and kill their way to Chongyue True Temple. As for Zhang Yan saying that the knife was given to his disciple, he thought that it was a lie. Killing weapons were 1 in 100 and were extremely difficult to find. Even if Chongyue True Temple had 3 major weapons in their hands, there was only one that could be used to injure the enemy in battle. He didn't think that Zhang Yan couldn't see the value in it, so he was more willing to believe that the Yin killer knife was unwilling to be controlled. With the intention to kill in his heart, he didn't hold back when he attacked. His eyelids drooped, and he silently used his Xian Qi. His mana climbed up layer by layer, and in an instant, a dense white mist rose from the top. After it reached the clouds, it spread outwards. In just a moment, it densely covered the sky with a radius of more than 10 miles. For a moment, the haze covered the sky, covering the sun and the sky. Zhang Yan suddenly felt an invisible force enveloping him, as if a huge rock was pressing down on him. When he moved, it was not as easy as before. His body had only paused for a moment, and with this slight delay, the flying daggers that were chasing after him seized the opportunity and suddenly spread out, surrounding him from all directions. However, they were not in a hurry to attack, and instead faintly sealed off his path of retreat. Zhang Yan swept the surroundings with his gaze. He was able to faintly sense that these flying daggers contained some sort of profound technique, and it was slightly similar to a formation. It had already locked down this expanse of the heavens and the earth, causing him to be unable to fly out. He was instantly on guard. That day, when he fought with the statue of the Divine Lord of Lai Xian sect, he felt that it was difficult to make a move, so he also used a similar technique. Just now, he was trying to capture him. The lesson was not far away, and he didn't dare to let his guard down at all. At this moment, Shenlin Tu raised his hand and made a few complicated hand signs. There was a faint surge of spiritual energy behind him, and all of a sudden, a blade ray soared up to the sky. It was half black and half white, and the ferocious light kept spitting out. From the sea to the sky, it was at least 1,000 feet tall. He remained silent for a long time, and suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes shone brightly, and with a roar, he suddenly stretched out his hand and pointed at Zhang Yan. The blade ray behind him suddenly trembled, and like a collapsing mountain, it suddenly slashed down, as if it wanted to kill him in one go. This blade ray traversed the sky, and it was at least a few miles long. A loud rumble could be heard in the eardrums, and before it landed, the sea below was already separated from the two sides. Just by looking at the power of this blade, Zhang Yan knew that he couldn't take it head-on. He took a deep breath, and with a light touch of his feet, he used the small heavens shifting escape technique. In an instant, he was 1,000 feet away. He only heard a loud noise behind him, and when he turned around, he saw that the blade had actually cut the temple below into two, and a ravine that was more than 100 feet wide and a few miles long was formed. Seeing him dodge, Shenlin Tu sneered and waved his blade again. This time, it was a diagonal slash. Zhang Yan's figure flickered, and he once again escaped 1,000 feet away. He heard a loud rumble, and it turned out that a section of the coral wall of the reef manor was shaved off. Shenlin Tu waved his blade a few more times. Now, every blade had great power, and it consumed a lot of mana. If it wasn't for the fact that he had trapped Zhang Yan, he wouldn't have used it like this. However, he didn't expect that he would be able to kill Zhang Yan with this. He only used this method to force him to keep dodging, and to restrict him from the side, so that he wouldn't have time to worry about anything else. At the same time, he urged the 486 flying daggers under the blade to press inwards, slowly squeezing the space that Zhang Yan could dodge. Seeing that with a few more slashes, he would be able to make Zhang Yan have no room to dodge. Shenlin Tu felt that victory was already in his hands, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. Chapter 489. Shenlin Tu used his magical powers a few more times. Wherever the blade light passed, the circle that Zhang Yan could maneuver became smaller and smaller. After another short moment, he felt that the time was ripe, so he condensed the Fa Li in his entire body and silently circulated it for a while. After that, he suddenly shouted loudly and stretched out his hand, and a brilliant light that was like a bolt of lightning struck down from the sky. This flying knife was made by Shen Lintu with all his strength. If it hit, even if Zhang Yan had the protection of 2 magic treasures, it was very likely that he would die. But at this moment, in Shen Lintu's field of vision, he saw a clear light fly out. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a flying palace that was 250 feet long and wide. It was surrounded by clouds and had watchtowers at each of its 4 corners. The blade light slashed upwards, but it was like a light feather of a willow leaf. It only caused a slight ripple in the light of the restriction. Other than that, there was no other movement. Zhang Yan stood in the hall and watched the blade light disappear. He couldn't help but smile. He shook the talisman in his hand and the huge palace under his feet made a loud noise. He rushed out and immediately smashed the flying knives that surrounded him. He easily escaped. Shen Lintu stared at him. He was shocked and angry. He never thought that Zhang Yan would have such a treasure with him. He was caught unprepared. When he reacted, he saw that Zhang Yan had already walked out. He scolded angrily, "Junior, how can I let you get away?" Hua shouted a few times and continuously used the yin-yang flying knife to slash at the flying palace. But it was all in vain. The flying knife light was like a wave hitting a reef. It only smashed itself into pieces, but it couldn't shake the flying palace at all. Even if his cultivation was at this level, it was wishful thinking to want to deal with this thing. This stellar pivot flying palace was originally given to the top 10 disciples of the Yingtsang sect to protect themselves and save their lives. Even if they encountered Taoist Master Dong Tian, they would still be able to resist a little, not to mention that the master of the palace, Zhang Yan, was also a nascent soul cultivator, which was not something that Shen Lintu could break through. Shen Beidu tried a few times, but his qi was weak and his qi was weak, but he still could not do anything to this object. A deep sense of helplessness welled up in his heart, and he said hatefully, "If I had the killer blade, I could break this palace with one blade. Why would I stop here?" Zhang Yan leaped up and went to the top of the flying palace. His eyes showed that he was thinking about how to deal with this person. Ever since he had stepped into the Tao, most of the opponents he met who had a higher cultivation level than him would attack him without holding back. However, Shen Lintu was an exception. This person was cautious in his attacks, advancing at every step. He did not slack off just because his cultivation was higher than his opponents. Even when he had the absolute advantage, he did not let down his guard and neglect his defense. He was very calm. Zhang Yan thought about all the methods he could use. He did have a few ways to defeat this person. But to kill this person was extremely difficult. Zhang Yan went through all the methods he could use. There were several ways to defeat him, but it was extremely difficult to kill him. To deal with someone who was good at defense, Zhang Yan's idea was the same as Shen Lintu's. It was to find a way to force the opponent into a desperate situation to have a chance of winning. But Shen Lintu's body was a Yuanying body and not a body of flesh. Not only could he fly through the clouds as fast as a rainbow, if he did not have the ability to defeat the enemy, he could let the enemy escape. Zhang Yan thought for a while and suddenly a bold idea came to his mind. He lowered his head and thought for a while. When he raised his head again, his eyes were full of energy. He waved the talisman in his hand and the flying palace turned into a clear light and fell into his sleeve. He then used the sword and rode a bright light. He flew back the way he came and thought, "Let's see if you will take the bait." Shen Lintu saw that Zhang Yan suddenly kept the flying palace and went to his own residence. He was startled and did not know what Zhang Yan was trying to do. But when he saw Zhang Yan fly away, he hesitated for a while. In the end, he could not give up the temptation of the Yin killer blade. He used the sword and chased after Zhang Yan. The two of them chased, and in a blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Zhang Yan was flying in the front when suddenly he heard the sound of thunder in the distance. He knew what was going on and thought, "Good." He turned around and smiled at Shen Lintu. Then he sank down. Before he reached the surface of the sea, he made a hand seal and disappeared. No one knew where he went. This was the water stride technique of the 5 elemental roaming technique. As long as there was water, he would be able to travel dozens of miles away with a flick of his finger. It was just that he had not mastered this technique yet. Otherwise, even if he was trapped by the restrictive formation on the sea, he would still be able to use the water stride to escape. Shen Lintu had never seen this technique before and did not know what it was. He thought that Zhang Yan had gone deep into the sea. He snorted and rushed down. But after rushing into the sea, he didn't see Zhang Yan's figure for more than 10 li. He was extremely puzzled and thought to himself, "This junior is only a step away from me, how can he run so fast? Don't tell me it's another treasure?" After he turned around, he still did not find anything. Just as he was feeling annoyed, he suddenly felt a surge of spiritual vigor from the southeast. It seemed to be heading towards the sea. He opened his eyes and saw that it was Zhang Yan. He did not think much and immediately turned into a ray of light and chased after him. In a flash, he broke through the sea and reached the surface of the sea. He saw an island in front of him. Zhang Yan was standing on the peak with a purple flower in his hand. His clothes were fluttering and he was smiling as if he was waiting for him. Shen Lintu stood in the air and said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan, what the hell are you doing?" As he spoke, he didn't hold back. He raised his hand and sent out a blade light that slashed down. He was just about to use another divine ability when his hand suddenly stopped and he stared blankly ahead. To his disbelief, he had actually chopped Zhang Yan into two with a casual slash of his saber. Fresh blood flowed all over the ground. When he looked carefully, he had already discovered some clues. He couldn't help but say angrily, "Little brat. So this junior knows the false body Dao technique." However, he did not realize that not only did that slash destroy Zhang Yan's fake body, it also destroyed the purple jasper hairpin flower. Although he was a Yuanian cultivator, he had never heard of this flower. He didn't know that this was what the dragon carp wanted the most, so even if he saw it, he didn't pay much attention to it. However, at this moment, he suddenly heard an angry roar that seemed to come from hundreds of miles away. It shook the sea and the sky, and he couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. He thought to himself, listening to this sound, could it be that dragon carp? So I've trespassed into this old demon's territory. This old demon isn't very smart, but his cultivation is not shallow. It's not good to meet him face to face. Unfortunately, that junior hasn't gone far, and I don't know where he is right now. The dragon carp was a strange species. It couldn't cultivate into a human, but it had a long lifespan. There were even some that lived for more than 10,000 years. This dragon carp had appeared on the sea when Shen Lintu was cultivating, and it had lived for thousands of years. This sea area was the old demon's territory, and Shen Lintu also knew about it. However, the old demon rarely came out, so he didn't think about it for a while. He didn't want to meet the dragon carp, but he was a little unwilling to leave just like that. Just as he was hesitating, he saw a sword light leap out, and Zhang Yan appeared not far away. He smiled at him and said, "Are you looking for me, fellow Taoist?" Shen Lintu was startled, and then his eyes lit up with joy. He said, "Zhang Yan, you're really brave to come in front of me. Let's see where you can hide now." With a shake of his sleeve, a bright light burst forth, and hundreds of flying daggers flew out at the same time. Zhang Yan smiled, and a sword light rose up, wrapped around his body, and instantly turned into a ray of light and flew away. "You go to Ping Li." Shen Lintu finally caught sight of him. How could he let him go? He used all his strength to activate the blade's aura, leaped up, his body and the blade became one, converging into a ray of white light like a rainbow, chasing closely behind him. Although Zhang Yan was flying in front, he only circled around, and didn't leave this sea area. The two of them circled around 3 to 4 times, and saw a wave that was hundreds of feet high coming from afar. A monster with a dragon's head, a fish's body, and a horn on its head was bobbing up and down, and behind it were no less than 100 python spirits, 1,000 demon sharks, and the rest of the fish and turtle spirits were countless. They were creating a huge wave, rushing towards them. Although Shen Lintu also sensed it, and knew that it was the old demon, he was a little afraid. However, if Zhang Yan didn't leave, he had no reason not to. The monster with a dragon's head and a fish's body arrived in an instant, and with a roar, it jumped out of the sea with a huge amount of seawater. The monster had a long beard, wide lips, and a very dignified appearance. Its body was covered with golden scales, and under the bright sun, it shone brightly. Its body was hundreds of feet long, and there were only 2 claws under its abdomen and 3 toes on its palms. There was a black cloud around it, and it floated in front of the 2. With such a great demon in front of them, Shen Lintu and Zhang Xian also separated, each retreating 1,000 feet back, temporarily stopping the battle. When Zhang Yan saw that the old demon was staring at Shen Lintu with its turtle eyes, he knew that his trick had worked. When he passed by this place earlier, the dragon carp came out to look for him after smelling the purple hairpin flower. Therefore, he guessed that the flower was very tempting to the monster. Therefore, he purposely set up this situation to trap Shen Lintu. If the 2 of them could fight, then he could benefit from it. This was actually a sudden inspiration, and he didn't know if he could trick Shen Lintu, and he wasn't sure if the dragon carp would fall for it. However, as long as there was a 30 to 40% chance of success, it was worth it, and he would just have to sacrifice a flower. With his current cultivation, even if he set up a big formation to lure the dragon carp here, he might not be able to capture it alive. At this moment, Shen Lintu also felt that something was wrong. This was because the dragon carp old demon ignored Zhang Yan, and more than 90% of its attention was focused on him. His eyelids twitched a few times and he coughed. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, the 2 of us have karma to settle. We accidentally trespassed into your treasured land, and we didn't mean to offend your realm. Please forgive us. If you don't like it, I will leave now." The dragon carp didn't say anything. Shen Lintu wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt a sense of danger, and he shouted, "Oh no!" He didn't even have the time to dodge before a mountainous tail covered in fish scales scuttled out from under the sea and fiercely slammed onto his protective treasure light. Even though it didn't break open, it still made him tumble down from the clouds. Shen Lintu rolled on the cloud before he stood up, and his expression was a mixture of shame and anger. He never expected that this old demon would actually be so unreasonable and attack him right away. As an elder of the Chongyue True Temple, he was actually beaten by a demon, and he truly couldn't afford to lose face like this. He gritted his teeth and said, "You stupid worm that's covered in scales and horns, neither a dragon nor a fish, could it be that you think I'm easy to bully?" Latest update, please. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.